everyone. OISG Commission for Safeguarding is very pleased to welcome you all to this webinar titled Responding to Members of Religious Orders Who Have Abused. We are very happy to see such large number of people attending this, which only shows the urgency and the significance of this topic for us today. We are very happy that you have come. We have two presenters today, Brother Brandon Geary, a Marist brother, and Miss Nancy Camilleri. The first half will be covered by Brother Brandon, and Miss Nancy will occupy the second half. Father Mario and I will help you navigate through the agenda. And our technical experts, you have already seen them. They will, at a later moment, send you into groups for and with some instruction at a later time. So we shall begin our webinar, this conference, with a short prayer. And for our prayer, I have taken the part of the first reading of today. I will read that in English, and then I'll also project it in Italian. I find this reading very relevant to the topic of care and protection, of safeguarding one another. And then I will invite you to stay with a line or a phrase that touches you most and allow yourselves to be transformed by the word of God. And then we will close the prayer with a hymn of trust. I will share a few slides with it. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the whole assembly of the children of Israel and tell them, be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. You shall not defraud or rob your neighbor. You shall not withhold overnight the wages of your day laborer. You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind. But you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. You shall not go about spreading slander among your kin, nor shall you stand by idly when your neighbor's life is at stake. I am the Lord. You shall not bear hatred for your brother or your sister in your heart, though you may have to reprove him, her. Do not incur sin because of them. Take no revenge and cherish no grudge against your fellow countrymen. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. We shall now listen to a song called A Trusting Psalm by Kevin Bates, which I think reflects this time, this graced season of Lent and our need for God's mercy and kindness.
We can't hear. I don't think anyone is hearing anything.
Sir Mary-John.
So, dear friends, I would like to present Brother Brendan. It is with great joy that I welcome Brother Brendan, known to many of us. Brother Brendan is a registered clinical and counseling psychologist. He was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and entered the Marist Brothers in 1975. And he has worked as a teacher, youth worker, retreat worker, counselor, psychologist, and formator. He has co-edited 4 books, including The Dark Night of the Catholic Church on the clergy sexual abuse crisis, and has published articles and book chapters on sexual abuse, adult bullying, sexuality, spirituality, and human development. He has presented retreats and workshops in Africa, Europe, the United States, South and Central America, Malaysia, and the Philippines, New Zealand, and Australia. He served as provincial of West Central Europe, which comprised of Ireland, Scotland, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And he represented the Marist Brothers at the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry in 2019. Brother Brendan has been involved in training and formation in the area of safeguarding for many years, and is currently a member of the Care and Safeguarding Commission of the International Union of Superiors General and the Union of Superiors General in Rome. And he is currently involved in a research project which involved interviewing Marists who abused children. In this webinar, Brother Brendan Geary will explore and share his reflections on ways of responding to members of religious orders who have abused. making use of the Good Lives model of offender treatment, his own experience, and based on recent research for members of a religious order who abused children. Brother Brendan, you are most welcome and we are excited about learning from you. Over to you.
Thanks, Mary John. I'll just set up the slides to make sure we can do that. Okay, can everyone see the slides? That's okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
okay.
Thanks. Before we begin, I'd just like to say a word of thanks to everyone who's participating. It's hugely encouraging for those of us who prepare these webinars that so many people choose to participate. So thank you for that. I hope you won't mind if I acknowledge a couple of people. I'm in Dublin at the moment, but I see that my fellow Scot, Sister Eileen Cassidy, is participating, and my friend Sister Liz Murphy here in Dublin. I also see other names that I recognise. Thank you for joining us today. I was hoping, as part of the webinar, to have a couple of moments to ask you to share in groups, but the technology people asked us just to do that once, and we'll do that after Nancy's presentation. So if you have a paper and pencil, there's a couple of times I'll ask you to do some thinking and note-taking. We won't share, but I'd just like you to do some thinking yourself before I share some of my own ideas. You notice a little photo in the top left-hand side. It was taken in Fangano Island in Lake Victoria, and it's one I love. These little children, little African children, and me just kneeling down talking to them. And in its simplicity, it reminds me of what I hope safeguarding is about. On the right-hand side, you'll see a photo of a statue which I was shown in 2010 in the Netherlands, a town called Hengelo, to remember victims of clergy abuse. Now, I know there are many such statues and memorials in various parts of the world, but that was the first that I ever saw, and I took a photo. And I want to begin by calling to mind what's called the paramountcy principle, which comes from social work, I think, which says that the needs and interests of victims must have paramount consideration. So while the focus of this webinar is on responding to and caring victims of our perpetrators, we do that because we care about victims. At the very bottom line, to make sure that no one is abused again. But that's our priority, is the care of victims. Cardinal Casper, in his book Mercy, wrote, "A much discussed form of pseudo-mercy nowadays consists in protecting the wrongdoer more than the victim. Protection of the victim, therefore, must precede protection of the offender." With all that we now know about abuse in our church, sadly, that was often inverted, and abusers were protected rather than victims. I want to begin by looking at perceptions of clergy offenders. On the right-hand side, there's a cartoon which was published in the Times newspaper in 2007. It was published because of abuses reported about the Church of England, but it could be the Catholic Church. As you can see, that it takes the fairy tale of the gingerbread house of all the sweets and altar boys coming, and behind it there's a vicar or a priest looking forward to them coming. It's a very unpleasant image, but that was what the media presented at that time. In 2002, I worked in the United States as a therapist with sex offenders, not clergy, just sex offenders, and also victims, young girls who were victims. And the tablet newspaper had a news item that the Catholic Church in England and Wales and the Anglican Church were thinking of setting up a halfway house for clergy who had been in prison for sexual abuse as they transitioned back into the community. I remember thinking, that's something I might do when I go back. The following week, there was a letter from a victim of abuse criticising the initiative, saying, Here we go again. The church looks after the perpetrators and does nothing for the victims. And this, I thought, very, very worthwhile, laudable initiative appears to have been abandoned because of the reaction that not enough was being done for victims, so therefore we shouldn't do something for the abusers. In 2005, Cardinal Ratzinger, as he was then, in the Stations of the Cross, talked about filth within the church, referring to sex offenders, describing them as filth. And I remember in 2006 I met Father Steve Rossetti, who ran the St. Luke Treatment Centre in Silver Spring in Washington, D.C., and I asked him that after the Boston crisis, if there were many priests and brothers sent for treatment, and he said, bishops are laicizing priest offenders, they're not sending them for treatment. So rather than look for help for these men, they were simply being dismissed. Some of you may know the name of Father Bob Nugent. He was an American priest who had a ministry in the 70s, 80s, 90s with homosexual men and women and priests and religious. And I got to know him when he was silenced. He came to live in the house I was in. And he wrote a Commonweal article on his contact with a clergy offender who was in prison, whom he went to see. And in his article he wrote, I sensed, however, his regret at the almost total absence of any emotional support, pastoral care, and institutional concern for priests convicted of sexual abuse. Perpetrators like him are vilified by society, isolated and ignored by family and friends, shunned by their bishops or religious superiors, and in the prison culture, targeted for special disdain. They are often beaten brutally by fellow inmates, whose attitude toward them mirrors that of the rest of society. Now, I want to say that's not true of all priests and brothers who've been in prison. I know many, and I'll talk about it, who've received remarkable support, but it is true for some. And some of you may know that the former Father Geoghegan, who was the focus of the Boston crisis, he was murdered in prison. A member of my religious order, who was no longer a brother, he had his throat slashed in prison and took the government to court for lack of care. And another priest I heard of in England was taken by the staff into the courtyard where all the prisoners were round the walls, hammering the bars and shouting at him as he stood terrified inside this courtyard until the prison officers took him out. So people do not look well on priests, brothers or sisters who are found guilty of abuse. Regarding how we view clergy offenders, I'd like to contrast one way that says they're not like us, another way that says, well, they are people like us. One says they're like moral strangers. They don't live by the same morals as we do. They're different. Another view says, well, they're human beings. They are our fellow priests and brothers, but they've done something very, very bad. One view would say they should be laicized as part of punishment. They don't belong with us. Another view would say they should be laicized as a consequence of behaviour and so they can go and live a better life, depending on a range of factors. Another view should say they should be humanely contained because there's an enduring risk. Others would say, let's see if we can work towards an appropriate inclusion and participation as far as possible. One view would say they deserve punishment and retribution. Another view would say they merit appropriate punishment and consideration. One view would say they don't deserve opportunities or resources. Another would say they're entitled to try to lead a good life. And you might find yourself thinking, where am I on that continuum? How do I regard people who have been priests and brothers who offended? The question is, how do we respond? So I'd like you to do some thinking with your piece of paper if you can and say, what options are there in your religious order for a member of your order who has been found guilty of or who has admitted to sexual abuse? And how might you decide which option to choose? So just do a bit of thinking and make a few notes. What options are there for you and your religious order and how you respond to somebody who's been found guilty of or admitted to sexual abuse? We'll just take a few moments while you think and maybe jot down some notes, and I'll share my ideas afterwards. Okay, here are some thoughts. This is St. Luke's Centre in Silver Spring, which does therapy with priests and religious with difficulties. One option is that they can live in a community, and there are lots of priests, brothers who have been abused who do live in communities. Another option, which happens to some, is they go and live in an apartment, paid for by the order, where they live on their own. There are certainly people who have gone to live with a family member, like their own sister. I remember some priests in America were out of ministry and their sister, who was on her own, got accepted in. Or you can have a special religious community. Sometimes monasteries have been asked to take in people who have been not able to go into ministry. I remember in America there was a bishop against whom there was an allegation. This is 25 years ago. And he then went to reside in a monastery quite far from anything. One of our brothers, after coming out of prison, he was offered the possibility of going to a monastery, which was prepared to take him. There's also a not very pleasant phrase called warehousing. So a warehouse is where you store things. And there are houses, I certainly know of at least one in America, and maybe two, usually far away from other people, where people who've been out of ministry are brought together with supervision, with a good enough life, and they're given activities and therapy, where they're not allowed to leave without permission or a chaperone, and they don't interact with children or other vulnerable people. And the phrase that's used is warehousing. The other unfortunate phrase is an ecclesiastical prison. There are also retirement homes for elderly religious. I know certainly in my home city of Glasgow, where there was certainly one priest who, after being, not sure if he was laicized, but he was allowed to live in a retirement home. And certainly in Australia, I know of a case of that as well. And of course, the other possibility is dismissal. We can decide that this person can no longer be part of us, or the person can choose to leave. But it seems to me those are the various responses. I've put St. Luke's because they had a part of this very big building where there were religious who were out of ministry, who were cared for. And of course, it's very expensive for them to be cared for in this way. The other question is, what values or factors might influence our decision regarding how to respond to a member of a religious order who's been found guilty or who has disclosed or admitted to the abuse of a child or vulnerable adult? And just do a little bit of thinking, and then I'll share with you my own thoughts on the kind of factors that I have found have been important for me. A really big factor, it seems to me, is what I would call congregational fraternity. My friend, Dr. Barry O'Sullivan, interviewed 6 priests about the impact of the abuse crisis on them, and all of them spoke about the fact that these priests were their brother priests, and that sense of the shared fraternity of priests was important. And I think the same thing obtains in religious orders, a sense that these are our brothers, these are our sisters, that we have to care for them. Another factor is the theology of mercy. And a man who was our provincial in the 1950s and early 60s who dealt with cases, and he said to the provincial at the time, "You won't understand, but we tended to think in terms of giving someone a second chance, that we should exercise forgiveness and be merciful." To be fair to the leaders at that time, they had no understanding of the psychology of abusers, and they couldn't because that research had not been done. But they were influenced very strongly by a desire to be merciful. And our theology of mercy is very important. I'm not dismissing it. It also, for me, relates to age. How I would respond to somebody who's 30 is different to how I would respond to somebody who's 70. And I'll say more about that later. The presence or absence of remorse. It's interesting as I reflect on this, how much it matters to me. It's really important, I think, for us humanly that someone can say sorry. We don't like people who don't know how to say sorry when they are guilty of something. There's a man who was my classmate when we joined the Brothers, who's currently in prison in Glasgow and has been found guilty at 3 criminal trials, one in England, 2 in Scotland, with more than 12 victims in 3 different places. He continues to say he didn't abuse, which I think is just impossible to believe. And that absence of remorse is something I find difficult. So where there's remorse, it's easier for me to be compassionate. Where there's an absence of remorse, I find it more humanly difficult. Should public perception affect us? Well, it does. So, and Nancy will say more about this. Often the impact of abuse can be significant where there's ministry still happening, especially how you respond to a person. If you're seen to be supporting and caring, they'll say, well, how can you do this? What about the victims? And of course, I think we do need to respond to the perpetrators. But there's something about the kind of notoriety which happens with some abusers, which can be very damaging to the mission of the order. And that has to be balanced with how we make decisions. The impact on other members. I remember a brother in Germany, when he discovered I had to tell him about the abuse, all the photographs he had about the place where the abuse took place, he destroyed. It simply hurt him too much to think that this place where he had gone with very happy memories was a place where abuse of children had taken place. Another brother cried when I spoke to him, the fact that one of our brothers had done this. And in Ireland, when the brothers were asked about this brother leaving prison, this is in the early 2000s, none of the communities were open to living with him anymore. And that's why monastery became an option. They said, sorry, we cannot live with this man. It's just too painful for us, given what we know he has done. The level of severity of abuse is an interesting one. The majority of abuse by members of religious orders, as far as I can see, if I can put it this way, is at the lower level of intrusivity in how you might want to manage it. Lots of the stories take the more extreme kind of abuse, but a lot of abuse was, and it's very hard to find language that doesn't seem to minimize, but it's at a lower level of the intrusion into a person's body and personal life. But when you get to significantly severe abuse, especially if there's any coercion or violence involved, there's always psychological coercion. That affects how I might decide what you might do. The number of victims. According to the American study, the John Jay study, and also an independent study in Queensland and Australia of sex offenders, half of the perpetrators had one victim. So some people think sex offenders want to abuse every opportunity they can. Yes, some do, but not all. So the number of victims would be a criterion for me. And again, Nancy will speak about that, about what we learned over time about the person she'll talk about. the person's capacity to live in a community. So if you can find a community where the person can live, will the person be sensitive to the effect of other people, or are they going to be needy and demanding and insensitive? Because if the brothers accept to live with someone who has abused, there needs to be some sensitivity by that person about the generosity of the brothers in accepting that. And discretion. Does the person have a capacity to live in a discreet, not too public way? And again, Nancy will talk about the case in Germany, where despite being told not to wear his satan, this brother was photographed wearing his satan and put onto a website. That's not discretion. That's not appropriate. And the last point is this person able to accept a care plan regarding their behaviour, where they can go, what they can do, who they have to talk to, etc. So those are all values and factors that might influence how we might decide what to do. I'd like to talk about what's called the Good Lives model. Professor Tony Ward, a wonderful clinical psychologist in New Zealand, he came up with this idea in 2002-2003 when I was doing some research. And he said, as human beings, we are rewarded when we achieve positive goals in our lives. And he mentions 12, but I'm only going to mention 5 here. Good, healthy relationships, which we all need. Meaningful work or occupation. Mastery and competence, the belief I can do something well. And recognition by significant others, to know that people value me and have a sense of wanting me to be around. And spirituality and meaning. Now, Tony Ward is not particularly religious, but it's interesting that he chose to put spirituality and meaning as one of the positive goals that people look for in life. Now, the hypothesis behind his proposal is that if offenders have a good life to aim for, they will be less inclined to seek to have their needs met in unhealthy and criminogenic ways that cause crime. That's a hypothesis. In the last 25 years, there have actually been lots of outcome studies about this with mixed evidence. That doesn't mean there's no evidence, but how you measure it is interesting. He also says, wanting a sex offender to have a good life also requires accountability. This is not a soft touch option where there's no accountability. There has to be a sense of being accountable for their behaviour and going forward. But he said we need to offer support. Now remember, he's not coming from a religious background, yet he's saying we have to operate from our shared humanity. As human beings, this is a member of our human community. We have to provide human support. We have to remember that no matter what they've done, they're still people who have a right to be treated with dignity. And that hasn't always happened in the way that these people have been treated. And I love this phrase. He said, they do not forfeit membership of the moral community. And that means the second part, we don't other them. Othering is a word that has become popular in the English language to say the person who's different from me is other from me, autre. He's not the same as me. And we see what happens in our world where you can treat Ukrainians as other. You can treat different ethnic communities in Africa as other. You can treat Palestinians or Israelis as other. They're not the same as me. They don't belong to my moral community. And he said that we have to aim for reinsertion into society with an attitude of inclusiveness insofar as possible. We also need to remember that even though they're being punished, and that's correct, sex offenders, clerical offenders experience significant losses. They lose their good name. They lose their ministry, often their accommodation, some if not all friends and family, financial security, what you might call their preferred future, and significant personal autonomy and agency. They're in transition to a new kind of life. Humanly, this is it's a moment of loss, of a big, huge change of life. I think that requires some understanding, even if we don't want to be in any way supportive of their behaviour, but to say this is a huge transition for them with lots of grieving, lots of loss. Let me talk about my experience moving away from the theory. I told you about the Irish brother in 2001, who said when he left prison he wanted to remain a marriage brother. Then we discovered none of the communities felt able to accommodate him. As it happened, some of them were in school properties, so we couldn't anyway. So the option he had was that we could find a monastery, which we did, where he could live. And at that point, he suddenly sensed that he didn't have a vocation to be a Marist brother. So he chose to leave. I wasn't involved, and he lived in an apartment not far from where I am just now, and he died about 7 years ago. In the 1990s, there were two accused brothers in Scotland. One had escaped Britain and gone to Cyprus, and when he was charged, he came back voluntarily, to be fair. He pleaded guilty and spent time in prison, and as soon as he left prison, he left the country, went back to Cyprus, and as far as I know, he died in Lebanon. Another brother was told about an allegation, and his concern was, I hope you'll make sure nobody finds out about it. And the provincial said, that's not a promise I can keep. As it happened, it didn't become public, but we were not going to make promises we couldn't make. In America, I know that some brothers have been housed in special facilities where they're protected, cared for, and safe. It means that they have support, they're cared for, but it's very expensive, certainly for the brothers to have that solution. With the Australian brothers, some were living in communities where the brothers knew, and I'd have to say when I was there was no difficulty. The brothers are remarkably gracious and accommodating, and some chose to leave the brothers. There was one man, whom I'll speak about later, who was dismissed, and the brothers paid for his health care, and another one, they arranged for his health care. So they've been very caring. I dealt with two cases of inappropriate attitude towards adult women, both of which I managed to manage discreetly, but in both cases I responded and removed the brother from the place where he had misbehaved. The German case I'll leave to Nancy. She'll speak about that in more detail. Mary John mentioned that I did some research with brothers who'd abused. I'd been interested for a long time about trying to understand how come priests and brothers abuse. I've studied sex offending. I could write you a paper on the etiology of sex offending, but I was still puzzled about how this could happen, especially the scale of it. And I thought, I think to answer this question, I need to speak to people who abused. And I was very impressed by Dr. Marie Keenan's book in Ireland on the Catholic Church and the abuse crisis. Now, I know Marie, I've met her. I think it's a hugely impressive piece of research. And our provincial in Australia, Peter Carroll, who's now Superior General, he promised the Royal Commission in 2017 that he wanted to do research to understand why abuse happened among the brothers in Australia. So I asked him if he'd like me to do it, and he said yes. So to protect the research, I did it as a research degree at Glasgow University, which I finished last year. I interviewed 4 brothers and 4 former brothers. All of them had pleaded guilty to abuse, so they weren't in denial, and that was important. All of them had spent time in prison, and actually that was important, because my experience of working with sex offenders in America is the thought of going back to prison frightened them. And I thought, if that helps protect children, that's a good thing. And Marie Keenan said to me, don't interview anyone who hasn't done counselling because they don't have a language to talk about their experience. So all of them had done counselling. 2 of the 8 were dismissed from the Institute, and participation was voluntary. And as you can imagine, by doing the degree at university, it was ethically correct in everything that I did, and that had to be accepted by the university. I'd have to say all of these 8 men were treated well by the Marist brothers. There may be former Marist brothers who've left who don't feel that, but these 8 did. The 4 who remained had worthwhile activities and responsibilities, were in communities where they related to the brothers. There were usually restrictions on what they could participate in, but that was known and was clear. They had regular contact with a designated brother, and they all have good contact with the Marist brothers. All of them had a very high regard for the provincial, who, as I say, is now the Superior General. So for the most part, their experience was very positive in terms of how the brothers dealt with the abuse when it was known, supported them, and continued care. These are quotations from what the men said when I asked them. Incidentally, I gave them names in alphabetical order, so these are pseudonyms, they're not their names. One man said, "The brothers are looking after me." There's no doubt about that. This man couldn't even manage a bank account. The brothers did that for him. He's the one who was in a care home, very elderly when I met him. Another said about another brother, "He was my sort of contact person. He helped me in bought clothing, which the brothers paid for, and they paid medical expenses. So he wasn't abandoned. He was supported, even though he was encouraged to leave." Another one said, "I owe the brothers so much in terms of their support and everything else, and the pain, of course, I can never repay." A sense of deep regret at the damage he did the brothers. He's the one who the brother's healthcare assistant helped to find a place where he could move in his elder years. Another said, "Maybe I should have been told to leave the brothers. I'm glad I wasn't, but today it would be the police. I mean, if I offend now, I've been told I'd be dismissed straight away." So he has got enough awareness to know that at the present time, the response might be different. And if he abuses again, I don't think that'll happen, he'd be dismissed. Another man who's left and made a professional career said, "By and large, the brothers have been phenomenal." So these men spoke very positively about how the brothers responded, even though 2 of them were dismissed, 2 of them chose to leave, and 4 of them remained as Marist brothers. I'd like to look a bit, before I finish, at the current Marist statutes, which were agreed at our general chapter in 2017, which I was privileged to attend. And this obviously comes as the result of learning by the Institute to that time. So it says, "The provincial or district leader shall recommend to the Superior General the dismissal of any brother who is tried and convicted of sexual abuse. That includes convictions for producing, accessing, or disseminating child abusive images or materials on the internet." I'd like to comment on that. You notice there it says tried and convicted. And that's important, that it has to be a conviction, not just an allegation. The thing about child abusive images, please note it doesn't say child pornography. Professionals in this area would say that if you call it child pornography, it's simply considered another kind of pornography. The issue here is it's a version of abuse with images of children. So that's why it says child abusive images. I asked for that to be added in so that no brother would be able to defend himself by saying, "I was only looking." If you look at images of children being abused, a real child is being abused somewhere. And this person, by watching, is actually participating in the production of this material. So we wanted to be very clear for any member of my order, you cannot say it's a lesser offence because it was digital and it was only looking. But there's a caveat you'll see after that which says, "In case of serious reasons that did not make advisable the expulsion of the brother in question, the provincial or district leader should inform the Superior General." I think I was the person who proposed that, but I can't remember. And my thinking was, mistakes are made, there can be false allegations, or you might decide that, for example, an elder man, it would be cruel to dismiss him. So I thought there has to be wiggle room to actually not always implement a statute where there's no nuance and no room for flexibility. And that was accepted by the general chapter. Also said, for serious reasons, the provincial or district leader and his council may impose restrictions on a brother who has abused minors. Part of this came from what I learned because of what I didn't do. Again, the case that Nancy will tell you. And in a sense, this is learning from us that we shared with the Institute of what we often didn't do. Permanent supervision, because one of the issues was, at what point does supervision or a care plan end? I don't know the answer. I think maybe it can at some point, but there has to be the option that supervision has to be there as long as the person's a member. limitations on the work he can do. So opportunities for ministry with people are over. You cannot do that anymore. But the person needs to find work. So there has to be some sense of a limitation, but what's possible. Also, restrictions on the positions he can hold in the institute and in secular life. This brother, we didn't say he couldn't be elected, so he kept getting votes for the provincial chapter, for example. You need to be clear this is not allowed, not possible. There was also a possibility of him being given a job in secular life in the local town, and I had to explain to the mayor, sorry, he cannot do that. This makes it a restriction that can be part of the agreement. Places to which he has access. Where can he go and where can he not? He was not allowed in the school, for example. Loss of voting rights. And restrictions on the use of religious dress and the title of brother. And for this person, that was a serious limitation which he found ways to get around. So you need to think carefully of what restrictions are you going to impose and be clear at the beginning of what you're doing. Sorry. Some reflections before I finish. In 2010, I was interviewed for the Belgian Panorama television programme by Ludo Penix, I think his name was. Interestingly, the interview was never used. So somebody said to me, you must have said all the right things because if you made a mistake, they would have used it. At one point in the interview, I was asked whether or not I would dismiss a brother who was found guilty of abuse. In 2010, I said, well, it's not simple to dismiss someone in canon law, which was true then, it's easier now. And I said, but it would also depend. And this was my answer, which I think I stick by. If a younger priest, brother, or sister is guilty of abuse, I think that person should leave and be given support to begin a new life. Again, Brother Peter Carroll said to this brother in Australia, who was asked to apply to leave, which hurt him and shocked him, you've had a wonderful past as a Marist brother, but you don't really have a future as a Marist brother. It may be in your interest to leave and build a good life. When I worked with sex offenders in America, and I had researched with 205 men in treatment, 75% of them were in full-time or part-time employment, which surprised me. I thought it was quite high. So it is possible to build a new life, but often in religious life, we're very limited in what we can offer them. If they're younger, they should be given support, not abandoned, not just dismissed, but given support to begin a new life. For one of the men in Australia, the brothers paid for a training program that enabled him to get a good job to support himself. If an older religious abuses, it may be cruel to dismiss him or her, and they should be given support in a safe, protected environment. That being said, an older man in one of the countries had so many victims that the brothers simply had to dismiss him, but they still cared for him. They still paid for his care and made sure he was looked after. For members in midlife, 50s, 60s, judgment's required. What's the best thing to do here? I think on balance, if the person can be helped to live a new life on their own outside, it's probably better to do that, would be probably my conclusion at this stage. A word about therapy. Marie Keenan, in her research, said that 8 out of 9 of the men in her study re-abused after being moved somewhere else. But to the best of her knowledge, none of them re-offended after doing therapy. The study I did, 3 out of the 8 men whom I interviewed re-abused after being moved somewhere else. 1 re-offended after therapy with digital images. Now, I'm not going to minimise what he did. He took images of people and he played digitally with what he can that he had been arrested for downloading 30,000 images of children. And I wrote to him at the time, and that was just to give support. But I then discovered years later, after being in prison, the police took his phone and there were images again. So he is a priest I know who offended twice, and it was digitally. You're looking at images. So a few things to think about. Can the community accept this person as a member of the community? And a question which this throws up for me, are there limits of membership and what are they? On the right-hand side, there's an image of a table that our founder, Martin Champagne, made in the early 19th century for the first group of brothers. And it's become a profoundly important image for the Marist brothers, gathered round the same table, table of the Eucharist, the table of welcome, the table of sharing of food. So that symbol is profoundly important. And the question is there a point at which somebody cannot sit around the table as a Marist brother anymore? And I've come to the conclusion the answer is yes, that child sexual abuse is something that I think should lead us to say, not in every case, but in some cases, either you cannot be a member with us, you may still be a brother with us, and we'll still support you, but membership is no longer possible. So it's forced me to look at that question. There has to be accountability, but with support. They are vulnerable, they've committed a crime, they've damaged children, but they're still human beings, and for many years they shared life with us, and they may have been actually very fine in many other ways. So we have to honour that as well. And I take up the Good Lives model. Can we offer emotional, practical, and spiritual support and training opportunities if necessary? Can we find meaningful work? One brother in Australia looked after a holiday home. One looked after an old retired brother who needed support. I know of others who've done gardening work or housework, some who've worked in archives, editing magazines. There's various ways they can be involved. We need to ensure accommodation and health insurance so they're not worrying about health. And if they've left us, do they want contact or not? I certainly know the ones who have left us in Australia, they valued the contact they chose to have, even though they accepted they were not members in the same way as before. And dismissal, if appropriate. So it's just coming up for 2 o'clock in Ireland or 3 o'clock in Rome or whatever time is wherever you are. And I think I'll hand it back to Mary John, who I think will give everyone a chance to have a break. But what I'd ask you to do is to take time to reflect on what I've offered you here. There will be a group discussion after Nancy's presentation, which is about her work with this one person in Germany. And a question to think about is what you'll take away, and there'll be an opportunity for comments and questions afterwards. So, Mary John, over to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Brother Brendan, thank you very much for that very informative, very engaging topic, applying both justice and fairness. Thank you very much. We came to know many new things, because also the topic from a new perspective, and you shed light on a number of issues. I'm sure we have many questions and many things to ponder and reflect. When we get back into the group work, we can do that probably. Now we will have a break for about 10 minutes. And when we get back, we will listen to Miss Nancy. And then, so that will complement and complete each other, this topic. Thank you very much. It was excellent. Thank you, brother,
Thanks,
very much.
thanks, Mary John.
Yeah. We are on time, just 10 minutes short of our, that's all right. So let's get back to the plenum at 10 minutes after, 10 minutes break.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mario Zanotti, the General Secretary of the Superiors Union of Superiors General, to present Miss Nancy, and let us listen to her. And Father Mario will facilitate this session. Thank you. Over to Father Mario.
Thank you, Mary John. Thank you. Bon après-midi, je vais parler en français. Et comme
Good
ça,
afternoon. I'm
on peut
going to speak
s'entendre
in
mieux avec
French,
Nancy.
so we
Je vais vous
can communicate
présenter
better
Madame
with
Nancy
Nancy.
Camilleri.
I'd
Je
like
suppose
to
que vous
present her.
avez
I suppose
des origines peut-être un peu italiennes.
you come from an Italian
Cécile.
family?
Plutôt maltaise.
Ah,
From
maltaise.
Malta.
Ouais, plutôt.
Très bien,
From
très
Malta.
bien.
Je suis française.
Very good, very good,
Bien.
very good.
Alors, Madame Nancy, comme elle nous a dit,
Miss
elle
Nancy,
est
Mrs.
française, mais
Nancy,
un petit peu
she's
maltaise,
French,
et
but
elle habite maintenant
she
en
also
Allemagne,
has
et
Maltese
précisément
origin,
en Bavière, à
currently living in
Middelheim.
Germany,
Et pendant
and
de nombreuses
for
années,
several
elle a
years,
enseigné les français et l'art dramatique au lycée des Maristes, des frères
French
Maristes.
and drama
Et donc,
in the
pendant
schools
qu'elle
of the Marist
était
brothers,
enseignante, elle était
and while
la
she was a
personne
teacher,
de
she
contact
was
pour les élèves qui avaient des
the key
problèmes
person
en famille ou
for
des problèmes
students with problems at
d'anorexie, de
home,
discrimination et aussi
problems
du
with
domaine sexuel.
anorexia,
Et
sexual
depuis
problems as
plusieurs
well.
années,
And
Nancy
for
a
several years
travaillé
now,
bénévolement
she
pour
worked
l'ordre des Maristes, des Maristes
voluntarily for
allemands,
the
et
order of
en
Marist
particulier
brothers
dans les
in
domaines de la
Germany,
prévention, de la
particularly
protection
in the domain of
des droits
child
des enfants
protection
et des
and
jeunes adultes
prevention and child
vulnérables.
human rights,
Et donc,
and
en
also vulnerable
collaboration
adults.
avec
So in
un
collaboration
frère
with
mariste, elle s'occupe
the
des
Marist
cas d'abus
brothers,
sexuels
she
qui ont été perpétués
follows up with
par
these
des frères.
sexual abuse
Et donc,
cases
Nancy,
committed
il a
by
eu de nombreux
brothers.
contacts avec
She had
l'un d'eux.
so
Et elle va
she had
nous
several
expliquer
contacts
son
with one of them.
expérience
She's going
d'accompagnement
to talk to
avec
us
un frère
about
qui a été
her
empêché de
experience of
travailler avec les
accompanying a
enfants,
brother
d'avoir un
who
ministère près des
was
enfants. Comme ça,
removed from his
elle
ministry
nous
with children.
va
So she's
témoigner
going
son parcours
to
d'accompagnement
talk
avec
to us about
ce
her
frère.
personal
Alors, merci
experience
Nancy, à toi la
accompanying this
parole.
brother. Thank you,
Merci.
Miss Nancy, and the floor
Alors
is
d'abord,
yours.
bonjour à
First of
tous
all,
et à
good
toutes.
morning,
Et merci d'avance pour votre
and
attention.
thank you for your
En tant
attention.
que personne de contact dans le
As a
domaine des
key
droits
person
et de
or
la
as a
protection
reference
des
person
enfants, des
in the
jeunes et
domain
des
of
personnes vulnérables,
rights,
il y
children
a
rights,
aussi
young
le
people, and
domaine des
vulnerable
abus
people.
sexuels.
There's
Et
also the
les
domain
abus
of
sexuels,
sexual
c'est un
abuse.
grand
And
éventail.
sexual
C'est-à-dire
abuse
un abus sexuel, ça peut
is
commencer
very
par des
large.
caresses, par des attouchements,
It
par
has a
des
wide
paroles sexistes.
range. It could
Et
start just
malheureusement, au
orally,
bout
and
de cet
then
éventail, ça va jusqu'au viol.
and the more you move in the range,
Et
it can
les abus
become
sexuels
more
sont
physical.
différents, mais les abuseurs
The
aussi sont différents.
the sexual
C'est-à-dire
abuse,
que
the abuse can be of different
plusieurs
types,
secteurs,
but
plusieurs secteurs d'abus.
also
Les
the
abuseurs
abusers
peut
can
être
be of
quelqu'un qui a
different
fait une
genres.
faute une fois,
I'm sorry, but the
il a
connection is
abusé une
cutting.
fois, c'est
Her voice is cutting.
assez rare. Et puis, vous avez
Sometimes
également les abuseurs récidivistes. Et le cas dont je vais vous parler, c'est quelqu'un
so
qui a
I'm
abusé
going to talk to you
pendant
about somebody
des vingtaines
who
d'années,
abused
sans
at least
qu'on
for
s'en aperçoive.
20 years,
Parce que c'est
20
toujours
years,
très très difficile
because
de
it's very, very
s'apercevoir
difficult
des abus sexuels.
to
Alors, quand j'ai
leave or to get out.
Excusez-moi, Nancy,
I'm
il y a un
sorry,
petit problème
Nancy.
de
There's
réception. On entend ta voix un petit
yes, we
peu
don't hear you. We
comme
don't hear
s'il n'y
you
avait pas
well.
assez de réseaux. Est-ce
Yes, it's
qu'on
like your
peut trouver
network
une
is
solution?
weak.
Je
We
sais
don't
pas.
Moi, de mon
we don't get
côté, je
you.
pense que je ne peux pas faire grand-chose.
Ok,
I
non, maintenant
couldn't
je
do a
t'entends
lot.
beaucoup mieux.
Now
Comme
it's
ça,
better,
D'accord.
peut-être.
but it's not
Ok,
stable.
on va
It's
continuer.
not
Merci.
stable. I'll
Voilà.
try my best.
C'est bon maintenant?
Oui,
Is
c'est
it
très bon.
better now? Yes, now
C'est
it
bon
is
comme ça.
better.
Alors, quand j'ai rencontré Gerhard, c'est l'abuseur, je vais l'appeler tout le temps comme ça,
So
ça sera
I'm
plus
going to
simple.
call the abuser
Je le connaissais déjà
Gerard.
car il avait
I
été
knew
éducateur
him because
et
he
plus
was a
tard
teacher
directeur de
and
l'internat.
later on
L'internat qui
principal or
fonctionnait avec le lycée
manager
des
of
Maristes à Mindelheim, en Allemagne, le lycée où j'ai
the
enseigné
boarding
durant
school
de
at
nombreuses années.
Mindlheim, where I taught
Je
for
le
7
connaissais
years.
en tant
I
que
knew
personne
him
très active,
as a very
toujours
active
en
person,
mouvement. Il fallait toujours
very active
qu'il fasse
person,
quelque chose de nouveau.
always on the run, always
Je le
doing
connaissais
something
comme une
new.
personne très charismatique,
I
beaucoup
knew
de
him
chant.
as a very
Il avait
charismatic person.
une aura assez
He had
prononcée.
really a
Il était
very
souvent entouré d'élèves, surtout les plus jeunes, qui le
charismatic
regardaient,
personality.
quelques-uns un peu comme le papa. Les
He
plus âgés le
was always surrounded
regardaient
by
souvent
young
comme un
people.
ami, comme un
Some of
copain.
them looked
Et
up to him as a
c'est ce que
father.
lui voulait. Il voulait
The
avoir
older
beaucoup
ones
de
looked at
contact
him
avec les élèves.
as a reference. He
Au
had
début, personne
a
ne
lot of
pensait à mal.
contact with
Quelqu'un qui a de bon contact avec des élèves,
students,
c'est très positif.
and whenever somebody has good contact with the students, you
Il aimait
think
beaucoup
bad
les
about
élèves,
it.
il s'en occupait beaucoup. Il
He
offrait
loved
même
his
aux élèves de
students. He took care
l'internat
of.
des week-ends dans un
He
chalet.
also offered the students staying in a
Bref,
boarding school
Gerhard était
exclusive
une
weekends
personne
in a different place.
rayonnante,
All
qui avait
the
beaucoup d'influence dans le domaine
characteristics
scolaire
of the
et
personality
aussi dans le domaine communal, en ville. Il
showed
était
a
très
very
connu.
solar
Ce qui
person,
explique
a very
aussi
solar person, very
pourquoi
joyful
il a été
person, and he
difficile
was very
de
known.
croire qu'il avait été un abuseur.
He was very known among a lot of people, and it was
Comme une
very
grande
difficult for
partie
them later on
des gens,
to believe that
Gerhard avait
he
ce côté soleil, ce côté
was an abuser.
solaire.
So in his
Il
personality,
s'engageait
he had
beaucoup dans
this
le domaine
side,
social.
very
Il a
solar
créé,
side.
par
So he's
exemple, un
very
groupe
active
de jeunes
in
pompiers
social
volontaires
life.
de l'internat. Il
So
avait
he
créé ce qu'on
created
appelle
a group of
SOS
volunteers
accident,
of the boarding
c'est-à-dire
school,
quand il y avait un accident de la route, où il y
another
avait des
group
grands
of
blessés ou
volunteers
des
to
gens qui étaient
assist
décédés,
people who are
on lui
victims of
téléphonait et il venait s'occuper des
incidents on the
familles, il
streets. They
venait les
used to call
consoler, leur
him.
apporter
So he came to
un
offer
réconfort.
support
Donc quelqu'un qui
and
était
sustain to
très engagé
members,
dans
to
le
families.
domaine social.
So he was very active in
Et
social life.
tu pourras mettre la caméra un peu plus bas, comme ça on te voit mieux et peut-être on
Can
entend
you,
mieux aussi ta voix.
yes, can
Merci.
you fix a
Ok,
bit
c'est
your
parfait.
cam
Comme ça
so we
va
can
très bien.
see you a bit better?
J'espère
Et
qu'elle va rester comme ça.
oui,
C'est bon comme ça?
oui, et la voix
Yes,
c'est
it's
aussi
much
mieux.
better.
Ça va mieux.
It's
Ok,
much
d'accord.
better. We hope
merci.
also the sound gets better.
Donc, à l'école, enfin, dans l'internat, il avait même
So in the
créé
boarding
une sorte
school, he
de
created
cloître, de monastère, en choisissant
sort of,
certains élèves, parce qu'il voulait créer des vocations.
cloister, a
Donc,
sort
quelqu'un
of
qui était vraiment très
monastery, because he
important
wanted
pour les
also
élèves,
to create
pour les
vocations.
collègues,
So he was a
dans
very
beaucoup de
important
domaines.
member for the students,
Ça,
for
c'était
the
son côté soleil, je
school.
dirais.
So this
Et
was
malheureusement,
his
là où il y a du
solar
soleil,
side,
il y
I
a aussi
would
de
say.
l'ombre.
But
Et son côté ombre et même
unfortunately,
sombre,
where you have the
c'était
sun, you
le
also
côté
have the
abus
shade, the shadow.
qu'il
So
perpétrait sur des
his
élèves qui lui avaient
was
été confiés.
the
Les
abuse.
parents, les enfants
The
dans cet
abuse.
internat,
So he used
qui
to
avait beaucoup
abuse of
d'élèves internes à
students who
une
were
certaine époque.
entrusted to him by
Vous savez, à
families.
l'époque, il y avait 200 élèves internes. C'est un
I'm
gros
sorry,
internat
but the
quand
sound
même.
is cutting. The sound is cutting.
Et
So
là
it was a
aussi,
big boarding school with
les
hundreds
élèves
of
qui étaient à
students.
l'internat, ils sélectionnaient
And he used to select
certains élèves, c'est-à-dire il
certain
voyait
students.
ceux qui étaient
He used to
émotionnellement plus sensibles.
choose
Par exemple,
those who
ceux
are
qui n'avaient plus
emotionally
de papa ou dont les
more
parents étaient
sensitive.
séparés.
Maybe
Ils
those who
repéraient
lost
très
their
très vite
fathers, maybe those who come from
les enfants
broken
qui étaient plus
families.
réservés et qui étaient beaucoup plus
So he used to
faibles, beaucoup plus fragiles.
choose weak
En plus,
members,
sa
fragile
position
students.
de directeur de
In
l'internat
addition to this,
lui
his
donnait
function
vraiment
as
de
the
l'ascendance
manager of the boarding
sur les
school
élèves, parce que
gave
c'était un
him a
poste
form of
vraiment important.
authority over the
Par
students.
exemple, si certains
So,
élèves étaient renvoyés de
if
l'internat,
some
parce qu'ils avaient
students
fait
were
des bêtises,
sent
disons-nous,
home because of
ils devaient
something
chercher
they
une autre
did in the
école,
boarding
parce que ne
school.
pouvant plus habiter là, ils devaient
they had
chercher
to
notre école
find
qui devait
another school
partir.
because they
Donc
couldn't
je pense à un
stay
certain moment,
in this one. So
Gerhard
at a
a
certain point,
joué aussi sur ce plan.
so he played on this factor
Il a peut-être
and
un peu de temps en temps
he
fait pression
tried
sur certains
from
élèves en disant
time to time
si tu ne fais pas ceci ou cela,
to sort of
tu auras des mauvaises notes à
threaten or
l'école ou
enter in
tu
this
seras
dynamic
renvoyé de
with
l'internat.
students to tell them if
C'est
you don't
une
do
énorme
this or
pression
that, you will be
psychologique
sent away.
pour les élèves,
So you
pour les
have to
jeunes.
find another school. So somehow
À l'époque où
he
j'allais le rencontrer
imposed a
comme
psychological
abuseur,
pressure on the students.
il avait
When
été
I met him
envoyé
as an abuser,
dans la maison
he
mère
was
des maristes en
sent
Allemagne,
to the
c'est-à-dire
mother
sa
house
maison
of the Marist
où
brothers in
vivent les frères
Germany,
âgés. C'est un peu leur maison de
and
retraite,
the
en quelque
house
sorte.
where
Avant de le
elder
rencontrer,
brothers used to stay.
j'avais lu tous les dossiers, j'avais lu les
Before
plaintes,
meeting him, I
j'avais
had
lu
read
les rapports de
all
la
the
police
files,
et les jugements
all
du tribunal. Au moment
the
où j'ai
complaints.
commencé à le rencontrer, il avait déjà été jugé 2 fois,
So when I started seeing him, he was
condamné,
already condemned twice.
peine avec
The
sursis,
court decision
c'est-à-dire
was
qu'il n'a
out.
jamais été en prison.
So he was
Peine
never
avec
sent to
sursis,
prison though.
avec au départ, il devait faire un
So
travail de caractère
he
social.
had to
Comme
he had to
on
do
appelle
some
ça
social service.
en France, le TIG, travail d'intérêt général. Et puis ensuite,
And
on
then
l'avait fait venir à
we
Faux, c'est-à-dire à la maison de retraite des juges anciens.
so he came to this
Dans
house
son
of the
cas,
Marist brothers.
d'après tout ce que j'avais lu, à cette
After
époque-là, il
everything I
s'agissait
read,
surtout
it was
d'actes
definitely
d'attouchement,
about
de caresses,
acts
et
of
aussi ce que lui appelait des tests de
touching,
confiance. Alors, je
flirting,
vais
or what
expliquer
he
ce que c'était parce
called
que faut
gestures of
s'imaginer ça. Il faisait
trust.
venir
What he called
le
gestures of
soir
trust.
un
So
élève
in the
dans son
evening,
bureau, l'élève
he would
était en
call his
pyjama.
students
Et
to his
Gerhard lui disait,
office. The
oui, je vais
student
voir
would
si tu
be
as
in
confiance en
pyjama,
moi, parce que la
and then he would
confiance entre moi et toi, c'est très important.
this is trust between
Donc,
us.
je vais
Installing
baisser
trust is very
doucement
important between
le
us.
pantalon
So
de ton
I'm
pyjama,
going to pull down
et
slowly your
si tu ne veux plus, tu
pants,
diras stop.
and if you don't
Ça
want,
voudra
I will
peut-être dire
say
que
stop.
tu n'as plus assez confiance en moi.
So
Donc,
it's
de
to
nouveau,
give the student
pression
the
psychologique.
possibility to
Beaucoup
say that he
d'enfants,
can
beaucoup d'élèves
do,
n'osaient
choose,
pas vraiment dire stop parce que
because a lot of
si je dis
students
stop, qu'est-ce qui va se
wouldn't
passer?
dare to say stop if he
Voilà,
called them
c'était
to
son
his
test
office.
de confiance.
So it was for him
Quand
what he
j'ai
called
abordé ce
gesture
sujet parce
of trust.
que je trouvais que c'était pas une attitude du tout normale par rapport
So
à un
that was
pédagogue,
not a normal
il a toujours
behavior
insisté sur le fait que
of
les
an
élèves pouvaient
educator.
dire stop
He always insisted on the fact
à
that the
n'importe quel
students could
moment,
have
qu'ils étaient
said
libres.
stop
C'était leur
at any
libre
time.
arbitre.
So they were free to say
Et
stop.
beaucoup n'osaient pas parce qu'il était le directeur.
But indeed, a lot of them
Vraiment,
couldn't say stop because he was the manager.
pression
He was the head of the
psychologique
house.
énorme.
So it was an enormous
Quant aux
psychological
attouchements,
pressure.
c'était souvent plus que des attouchements. Il aimait serrer souvent très très fort les garçons contre lui en disant
With
je
while
t'aime beaucoup, tu es très
it regards
sympathique, etc.
touching, he used to
Et
hug
beaucoup de
them
garçons disent qu'il les serrait tellement fort que eux
strongly.
sentaient tout d'un coup que lui avait une érection.
A lot of them would say
Ça aussi,
afterwards that when he used to
je
touch
crois que
them,
ça peut avoir
they would
sur
say,
l'âme
according to
et
the
le
files,
moral
that he had a
d'un
source
garçon de
of
13
erection.
ans, 14 ans. Hein.
So we're talking
Parce que
here about students,
Gerhard, ce
boys,
n'était
young
pas les
boys of 13,
petits
14.
enfants. On ne peut
So
pas vraiment
it's
dire
not
qu'il était un
about
pédophile, non? C'était vraiment les
younger
garçons
ones.
déjà plus jeunes, 13, 14 ans, 15 ans, etc.
So it was boys, 13-year-old boys, 14, 15.
Malheureusement, quand on parlait de ça avec
Unfortunately,
lui,
when we talked
il a presque
about
toujours
this with him,
minimisé
he
ces
always
actes
minimized
et
these
il a même
acts.
nié.
And
Très
he
souvent, il disait
also
non, je n'ai jamais fait ça.
denied them.
Il raconte des choses
Often,
qui ne sont pas
he
vraies.
denied,
Ils n'ont pas
and
compris
he
ce que
said that the
je voulais
students were
faire.
telling,
Il m'a
were
même
not
dit
telling
une
the
fois,
truth.
je
And he
crois
also
que
said
j'ai
to me,
mal
I think
compris, que j'ai mal
I
interprété
misunderstood or
certains gestes
misinterpreted
des élèves.
certain gestures
Je lui dis, oui, mais il ne faut pas oublier que c'est toi l'adulte.
We shouldn't forget that he is the adult.
La position d'un adulte en face
It's
d'un
not
élève.
about misunderstanding the gesture of a student. It's about
Mais
behaving as an adult person.
aurait été extrêmement fort. En plus,
In
son
addition to
attitude
this,
a
his
été assez
behavior
longtemps celle d'une victime.
was
C'était
for a
lui la
long
victime.
time the attitude of a
Il
victim.
disait que les
He
autres
victimized himself. He
avaient
said
menti. Il disait
that the
qu'il
others
souffrait de
were
cette
lying.
situation
He said
injuste,
that he was suffering from the situation,
qu'il avait été accusé à tort.
that he was
Au
accused
début, il disait même qu'il regrettait
wrongly. He said that
pour
he
les deux premiers
regretted
jugements d'avoir
for the
suivi
first
les conseils de
two
l'avocat qui lui avait
trials
dit écoute,
that he regretted
vaut mieux
following the
s'excuser
instruction of
tout
the
de
lawyer who
ça
supported
ça
him.
fait meilleur effet sur le tribunal puisque
He
de toute
said you
façon
need to
il y a des
admit
plaintes,
because we have the
il y aura un
complaints.
jugement. À ce
There
moment-là, il a
will
dit non,
be
je n'aurais
judgment.
jamais dû
And he said,
faire
I
ça, je
should have,
n'aurais jamais dû accepter ce que l'avocat m'a conseillé.
I shouldn't have accepted
Donc, vous pouvez vous
the
imaginer
suggestions that the lawyer
que
gave me to move
le
on with the
dialogue
rulings. So,
avec lui au début
as you can see, the dialogue with
n'était
him
pas très
in the
facile
beginning was not
et
easy,
les échanges
and
étaient
the
plutôt
exchange
frustrants.
were frustrating.
Je lui ai dit, et ta thérapie, tu
said
as fait une
To
thérapie,
him, what about your therapy? Did you
quels en ont été les
do?
résultats, comment
Did
est-ce
you
que tu as
go
trouvé
into
ça?
therapy? How did you
Il
find
m'a
this?
dit que la thérapie qu'il avait faite, qu'il l'avait
He said to
trouvée
me that
pas très
he didn't
convaincante,
find the
qu'elle ne
therapy
l'avait
very
pas
convincing,
aidé, mais
that it did not help him,
avait-il besoin d'aide, disait-il, que le groupe
but
de thérapie n'était pas adapté à son cas,
the therapeutic
et
group
que
was not
à partir d'un certain moment,
adequate to
il ne
his
suivait
case, and
plus aucune
starting a
thérapie.
certain
Et
point,
c'est là, je
he
pense
stopped
que
going to therapy or following
après,
any
on est
group.
toujours plus clair, on est toujours plus intelligent, on aurait dû faire ceci, on aurait dû
Later
faire cela.
on,
Je pense qu'à un
it's
certain
always
moment,
about being more
il aurait
intelligent,
dû-
having done this,
on aurait
having
dû
done that.
rechercher une forme de thérapie plus
So,
adéquate.
He should have
On ne peut pas forcer
found
quelqu'un
a
à suivre
therapy
une
that is
thérapie non
more
plus.
adequate to him,
Ça,
more
c'est
convenient.
difficile.
We cannot impose on somebody to go
puis,
to
au fil
therapy
du
if they
temps,
don't want to.
J'ai eu
with
plus
the passing
souvent
of
des
time,
conversations seul à seul avec lui. Parce
I had more
qu'on avait
conversations
l'impression
with
que
him
quand il me parlait,
because
quand on était seul, il s'ouvrait plus.
when we
Je
were
pense que
alone,
c'était parce que
he
je n'étais
used
pas
to
un
open up
frère.
more.
Et
It
que
was
ça jouait
because
un
I was
certain
not a
rôle pour
brother.
lui.
And the fact that there
Et
were
là,
no
ils sont
brothers with
plus
us,
accessibles.
with the passing of time, he used to
Alors à ce
open up
moment-là,
more.
j'ai beaucoup parlé des personnes
When he
concernées.
reached that
Je lui ai beaucoup
point,
parlé des
I talked a
victimes,
lot about the
des personnes
concerned people,
concernées
the
par ces actes,
victims,
des jeunes
the person who were
qui avaient
concerned with
été
his acts, the
abusés
young people
et
who
qui
were
ont
abused
souffert pendant des années,
and who
qui n'ont pas eu
suffered
de
for
jeunesse, en
years,
qui ont
all
abandonné leurs
their
études, qui ont fait des tentatives de
teenage
suicide,
years up to
et même qui
the end
souffraient
of their
encore, même à l'âge
schooling
adulte,
or
même s'ils
studies,
avaient fait
or
des
maybe
thérapies.
which led them to suicide, to
Certains
the adult
s'en
age,
sont
to
bien
be in
sortis,
therapy. Some of them
mais
were able to
d'autres souffrent
overcome
encore
this,
maintenant.
but a lot of
Alors quand je
them
lui ai parlé de cette
didn't.
souffrance
So when I talked to
des
him about
victimes,
the suffering of the victims,
il me disait toujours oui, mais moi
he used to
aussi
say
je
to
souffre.
me,
Il parlait alors
but
de
me
sa
too,
souffrance
I'm
et de
suffering
la
as well.
souffrance de ses
I'm
parents,
suffering as well.
hein, de ce qui
He
lui est
talked to
arrivé, de
me
ses
about
parents
his
étaient âgés.
suffering with his parents.
Il me parlait aussi des quelques
He talked to
idées
me as well
suicidaires. Il avait
about
plusieurs fois pensé
suicide.
à se
He had
suicider
suicidal ideas.
et qu'il
He
se
thought
sentait
of killing
persécuté.
himself several times.
Tout le monde lui voulait du mal.
And
Je
he
lui
said that
disais,
he
mais
felt
regarde, tu
persecuted,
fais
that everybody
quand
did
même
not
du
want him
bien
or love him.
aux gens, aux frères âgés. Ils ont besoin
And
de
I
toi.
said
Et ça, c'est quand
to
même quelque
him,
chose
you're
d'enrichissant.
doing good to the elderly brothers. They need you.
Mais sur toi-même. Qu'est-ce que tu veux? Comment est-ce que tu veux
I'm sorry, the
continuer de
connection is
vivre?
not good. So I said to him, you have a reason, you are good,
Et je
are
suis une
you're
personne
doing good now
patiente.
with the elderly
Donc,
brothers. I was very
j'ai
patient.
repris très souvent ces thèmes
I
avec lui.
repeated
Et
these
enfin,
terms
un
with
jour,
him,
j'ai été assez surprise.
and
Il m'a
one day
dit
I was
qu'il
so
regrettait
surprised. He said to
profondément
me,
ce
he
qu'il avait fait
regretted
à un
profoundly
jeune bien
what he
précis.
did to one
Parce que je
young,
savais,
one
par
specific
les choses que
person,
j'avais lues dans les dossiers,
because
que ce
of the
jeune-là,
readings
il
I did
l'avait
earlier.
vraiment apprécié et beaucoup aimé.
There were several cases,
Il a
and
dit qu'il n'avait pas
he said
imaginé, qu'il ne
he
pouvait
never
pas s'imaginer
imagined, he would have
à
never
quel point,
imagined
quel mal il lui
which
avait fait,
point
quelle souffrance cela avait
he made
provoqué
the other
chez ce
suffer,
jeune-là. Il
this
lui avait
young,
même écrit pour se faire
and he
pardonner,
also
et il l'avait même rencontré.
wrote to him, and he
Mais
also
ça,
met him.
du côté de ce jeune, ça a été vraiment
But,
pour lui
but for the
désastreux.
young person, for the young boy, it was
Mais
disastrous.
à ce moment-là, quand il a raconté tout ça, j'ai encore eu
At this
l'impression
point, when he
que de
told me
demander
all of
pardon,
this,
c'était
I
pour
had the
lui,
impression
enfin,
that
qu'il
asking
soit
for
en
pardon
repos un peu avec sa conscience.
is
De se
somehow
dire,
to
ah,
make
il
him
va me
feel at
dire oui, je te
ease with his
pardonne,
conscience.
et après tout sera
So he wanted the other
tranquille,
to
tout sera bien,
say,
tout ira bien.
yes, I pardon you, I forgive you, and that he would be
Donc il
okay.
pense encore surtout à lui-même.
So he thinks
Le provincial,
also
qui était
about
à
him.
l'époque
The
Brendan,
provincial
avait
who
rédigé et mis en place un
wrote
codex de comportement,
and puts
un plan de sécurité, en quelque
in
sorte.
implementation
C'était sécurité
a
pour
code of
lui
conduct and a
d'ailleurs, parce
plan
que
of security plan.
c'était vraiment un scandale ce qu'il avait fait,
At the,
mais
at
aussi
the
c'était
time,
la
what he
sécurité
did
pour
was
les autres,
scandalous.
parce que ce
It
plan
was
contenait
scandal not
certaines
also for
interdictions,
him,
par
but it
exemple
was for the
interdiction d'avoir
others.
des contacts avec
So
des
he
jeunes
was
ou avec des
prohibited from
personnes
having any
vulnérables,
contact with young people,
interdiction
vulnerable
de
people,
revenir à Milrenn où il avait été à
prohibited
l'internat parce qu'il y avait encore
to
des
come
amis,
back to
il
the
y avait
boarding
encore des
school.
contacts. Il lui était interdit d'y aller,
So he couldn't do
mais
that.
il avait aussi certaines
But he
permissions,
also
c'est-à-dire que quand il
had
devait demander s'il pouvait par exemple aller voir ses parents, chose qui lui était
permission
accordée, ce qui est tout à fait normal.
to go see his family members, his parents, for instance.
D'ailleurs, Gerhard savait se rendre très utile. Il s'occupait vraiment bien des
So
frères
he
dans la maison.
really took
Il
care of the elderly
vraiment, ils aidaient
brothers
beaucoup.
in
Ils
the
emmenaient chez le
house.
médecin,
He
ils
takes them
s'occupaient
a
de leurs
lot.
médicaments,
He takes them
etc.
to the doctors. He takes care
Et
of their
petit à
medication.
petit, il a
And slowly,
joué un rôle important,
he played an important role
et même assez important, dans l'administration de
in the
la maison
administration of the
et
house
aussi dans l'administration
and
de
in the
la distillerie que
administration
les frères ont encore à
of
Faux. Donc, il s'occupait de la
the distillery that the brothers had as well.
etc. Et il avait aussi
And he also had
un poste assez important dans le groupe MSIC, Mariste
a place in the
Solidarité
group of the Mariste.
internationale.
So it's a group for international
c'était
solidarity of
vraiment
the
une
Mariste
grande fois où
brothers.
il laissait avoir un poste important
So he
dans
had
ce
his place
groupement.
in this group.
D'un côté, je trouve important
I find important
qu'un abuseur essaie de se rendre
that
utile,
an
qu'il
abuser
ait un travail
try to
social,
be useful,
qu'il
to
essaie
find
de vivre de
social
manière
activity,
saine, d'avoir une vie
that he would
vie
lead a
meilleure, plus
healthy life,
équilibrée.
a
Mais pour
better
moi,
life.
de mon côté,
But for me,
j'avais toujours un exercice
I had
d'équilibre
always
entre ce que je
to
trouvais
have
bon
this
pour lui,
balanced
et d'un autre
exercise
côté, j'avais derrière
between
moi
what was
toutes les
good for
victimes,
him,
tous les
but
enfants qui
also
avaient
in
été
my mind
abusés, et ce
and
qu'il avait
in
fait,
the back of my
et cette
head,
souffrance
I had
qui restait là.
the victims and everything he did to them.
Alors, comment parler à cette personne de
how
ces victimes
To talk to these people about
qui
victims
eux sentait traité avec injustice. Il trouvait que lui avait une bonne vie, mais eux se trouvaient
So the
injustement
victims
traités,
would
car certains
feel
avaient porté plainte auprès de la police, mais
he
les
would
plaintes avaient
feel
été rejetées parce qu'à cette époque-là, en Allemagne,
it's a
la
lot of suffering,
prescription
and the
était
victims,
très
some of
courte.
them
La
would
prescription
have
était de
filed
5 ans,
complaints,
c'est-à-dire
but the
qu'au bout de
complaints
5
were
ans,
taken into
on ne pouvait plus
consideration.
l'accuser. Les plaintes
So,
n'étaient plus reçues. Et ça,
so
c'était une chose
they would
très, très
suffer a lot.
difficile à accepter pour les victimes.
And
Lui, il
sometimes,
est là, il
because
est bien,
a certain time has passed,
il a sa vie, il a un
the
travail.
complaints were rejected,
Et
and the victims were
Qu'est-ce qui
really
se passe avec lui?
hurt. So for some of them, the fact that he was
Et c'était
included
aussi
and he had
difficile
a new life
de
somehow,
parler de ça
while they
aussi,
were still stuck in the suffering,
car dans la
is very hurtful.
communauté, à ce moment-là, il avait un rôle important puisqu'il
In the
était
community,
vraiment
when he had
les frères.
this position,
Et certains
this
frères, ou
role
même certains
of
collaborateurs,
the
ne
others,
comprenaient pas ce qui lui était reproché, et
some
beaucoup
of the
pensaient même qu'il était
collaborators
innocent. Donc, lui se
couldn't
sentait
understand why he was
soutenu
accused earlier,
d'un côté,
and a lot of them
et nous
believed that he
arrivions
was
avec les
innocent.
reproches, comment
So
vas-tu
he felt that he was
traiter
backed up by
ces
these
cas-là, que vas-tu faire,
people,
etc.
and
Ça, c'était
we would
vraiment
come
très
with
difficile
the
de
victims
ménager les deux.
and telling him what he had done. So it was
Après
very
certaines
difficult
conversations
to
avec lui,
handle
où
these
la
two
façon dont
sides.
il parlait, que
And
petit à
after
petit,
talking to him
il se
and
sentait
slowly,
il était vraiment encore dans le déni.
he was in
J'ai pensé à
denial
un
more and
moment
more.
que je
At
voyais
one
seulement la
point,
pointe
I saw
de l'iceberg. Il y avait
only the
tant
top
de
of the
plaintes qu'on
iceberg, the
connaissait
head of the
et
iceberg.
que j'avais l'impression qu'il y avait encore
So a
beaucoup de
lot
choses
of things I knew were like
qui allaient arriver.
invisible, and
Et d'ailleurs, au fil du temps, d'autres plaintes sont arrivées de façon massive
other
et on a dû
complaints
donc
arrived later on.
modifier les règles de
So
conduite.
we
Par
modified the
exemple,
code of conduct.
il ne devait plus
So
être sur les
he
photos qui étaient dans
couldn't be in the
le journal ou
photos
sur Internet,
of
parce qu'on avait reçu beaucoup
either on the internet or
lettres,
in the
vraiment
newspapers
très,
or in the
très fortes.
newsletters.
Soit possible, que cet homme-là est encore une vie publique, etc.
So he couldn't be
Et bien
exposed
sûr, il
publicly,
ne devait plus porter
and he couldn't
sa soutane, son habit religieux en public,
put
parce que souvent sur les photos,
his
il apparaissait en soutane. Et pour certaines victimes,
his priest.
il y avait encore cette image de lui comme ça en soutane quand il les avait abusés. C'était
So
très,
he
très
couldn't
difficile à accepter.
really
voir
be dressed as a
sur Internet
clergy
ou dans le
with his
journal.
cassock, his robe.
Sur ces différents points
So on
de
these
changement
different
des
points,
règles
these
de
change that occurred because of the change
sécurité,
in
il a
the
fallu de
code of conduct
nombreuses
and the
négociations
security
avec
plan.
lui, car il ne voulait pas comprendre.
He did
Il
not want to
refuse de
understand.
signer le document.
He refused to sign the new
En plus,
regulations that were suggested
plusieurs
by
fois, il m'a dit,
Excusez-moi, il ne voulait pas signer quoi?
he
il
didn't
ne voulait
want to
pas,
sign
lui devait signer ce document, ce codex,
documents,
ces règles de sécurité.
the document
okay.
where the code of
Il
conduct
devait les
and where this plan
accepter,
of security
et s'il
was
les acceptait, il
modified.
devait les signer.
So
Très bien.
Et comme il ne
he
pouvait
was
pas les
supposed
signer
to
pendant
sign them.
longtemps,
He was
on a
supposed
dû
to accept them and sign
négocier
them.
avec lui
But he
pour qu'il
didn't.
accepte
We had
ça.
to
C'est-à-dire
negotiate with him, and we had to
ne plus
discuss
avoir
with
ce
him for a
poste
long time to
au
say that
Mariste
he
international de
he
solidarité,
cannot be in
ne
this
plus porter la soutane,
group of
ne plus
solidarity,
apparaître en
international
photo,
solidarity
etc.
of
Plein
Marist.
de choses
He
comme ça.
shouldn't put
C'est
on
bon?
his
Bien, très bien, merci.
priest's cassock. He
Alors un
wouldn't
jour, je lui ai dit,
be included in the
il a
photos.
argumenté que en fait,
So one
s'il
day,
n'était pas frère, dans la vie
if he
civile,
wasn't brother
il y a
in
longtemps,
civil
on ne
life,
reparlerait plus de ses actes parce
that
que ça
nobody
faisait
would
déjà
talk about
15,
his
20 ans.
acts because
Et
it's
que
been 20
dans le
years.
civil,
So he would say that. He would
c'était
say,
déjà passé.
should I have been in my lay life?
Il avait
Nobody
fait
would have talked about my stories, and
sa
it's been
peine
so
en quelque
long.
sorte. il avait fait ses 150 heures de travail social.
So he had offered 150
Alors, un
hours
jour,
of
j'ai fini
community
par lui
service.
dire, réfléchis
So
à ce
one
que tu
day,
veux,
I
réfléchis
said
à
to
la
him,
façon dont tu veux
think
vivre.
about what you want,
Si
think
tu
about
veux
your life.
vivre avec ces règles,
If you don't
eh
want
bien,
to
il faut
live
que tu
with
quittes
these
l'ordre des maristes.
regulations, you have to leave the Marist
Et là, tout de
Brothers
suite,
Institute.
il a été très choqué.
And,
Non,
and
non,
then he was shocked.
c'est une chose impossible pour moi,
This is
c'est
impossible for me.
impensable.
This is
Et un
impossible.
jour,
I
il a
cannot
fini
think about
par
leaving. And
signer
one day, he ended up
les nouvelles
signing
règles
the new
en
documents of the
demandant
code of
quand
conduct
même
and the new regulations
certaines
that were imposed
approbations.
on him, while
Parce que ça faisait
asking for certain permissions, because
pas mal d'années qu'il vivait
it
sous ces
was
règles.
for several years now that he
Et
has
puis,
been
malgré ça, après
living
ça, a
according to
commencé
this,
la longue période
these
il y a eu
rules.
beaucoup de plaintes, de nouveau, encore.
So there were more complaints
La police
with
est
in the
venue
future. The police
l'interroger
came
sur son
and had
lieu de
to
résidence, c'est-à-dire
question him
chez les
in
frères.
his
Il y a
residency
de
at the
nombreux
elderly
articles
brother's
dans les
house.
journaux,
Some articles
à la
were published
télévision
in the
aussi, et
newspapers,
des
on the
choses très
TV as well.
négatives pour les maristes.
And this
qui
is
ont
very
beaucoup
negative for the
souffert
Marist
de ça.
brothers. They suffered a lot from this.
Mais là encore, très souvent, Gerhard a dit
But then
non,
again,
c'est faux.
often he
Pour
continues to
les
deny.
gens,
And
ils ont
he
entendu
says,
que l'un s'est
no,
plaint, donc lui aussi il vient se
maybe they
plaindre.
heard about other complaints,
Et
so
peu à
they
peu,
came
il
up
dit,
with these ones.
c'est possible,
And then
mais
he
je ne me
says,
souviens plus.
and then slowly he
Donc de
started
nouveau,
saying, I don't
c'était
remember.
très difficile de
I don't remember. So it became again
continuer.
very hard to continue
Et
talking with
comme
him.
la loi sur la prescription a été changée,
And
certaines
since
plaintes
the
ont été
rules
acceptées et
and some
sont
complaints
arrivés
were
les procès.
accepted, so the
Mais pendant ce temps-là, le provincial et le
so
conseil
the trial
provincial
arrived.
avaient discuté de son cas
So the
parce que
provincials
les
discussed his
maristes
case
avaient de nouvelles
because
constitutions. dont
the
on a vu
Marist
un
had
petit
new
peu les règles tout à l'heure
constitutions, as
sur
you just saw
les diapos.
earlier with the two articles.
Gerhard avait été condamné et jugé plusieurs fois. Les
He was
plaintes
condemned
continuaient
and judged.
de se
The complaints
multiplier.
continued to multiply.
Il y avait des fortes pressions
There were
dans les
very
médias.
strong pressure in the media.
Je n'entre pas dans les détails. Alors,
I'm not
on a prononcé
going
son
to
renvoi,
go
son renvoi
further
de l'ordre.
in detail.
Il
So
a
we
dû
agreed on sending
quitter
him
l'ordre. Le jour
outside
où
of the
on s'est
order.
réunis avec le provincial,
So
le
his
responsable des maristes en Allemagne,
discharge of the
et
order.
qu'on lui a annoncé
So he
qu'il
had
allait
a
être
meeting
renvoyé de l'ordre.
with the provincial, and they told
J'ai
him
vu sur son
he
visage,
will
il
be
est devenu blanc.
discharged from the order.
Il a été extrêmement
He
choqué
was extremely
de
shocked
cette décision à laquelle il ne
by these
s'attendait
decisions
absolument pas.
that
Il n'a
he did not
jamais
expect
pensé
whatsoever.
que
He
ce serait
never
possible
thought
qu'on
that
prenne
it
la
was
décision de
possible
le
that this
renvoyer.
decision would be taken
Mais je pense que c'était
for the
quelqu'un
order to send him
qu'on ne
away.
pouvait plus vraiment,
And,
comme on dit, supporter.
and he is
Parce qu'il y avait
somebody
trop de victimes.
we couldn't support and sustain anymore because of the number of
À
victims
mon
and the
avis, je
number of
pense qu'il est important
complaints. And I
d'accompagner
think it's very
un
important
abuseur.
to
Mais il aura
accompany an
besoin d'une aide
abuser,
professionnelle,
but
de
we need a
suivi
professional,
psychologique.
we need
Et je
psychological
pense qu'il
follow-up,
faudra vraiment
and I think we need
considérer chaque cas. Qu'est-ce qu'il
to
a fait?
consider each
Combien de
case,
victimes
what
sont
the
là?
person did,
Est-ce qu'il est capable d'avoir,
who are the
de
victims who are
montrer qu'il a
there.
des remords?
Is he
Est-ce qu'il
capable
est
of showing
dire,
repentance?
oui, ce que j'ai fait, c'est
Is he
j'ai fait
capable of
énormément de
saying,
mal.
of admitting that he
C'est ça qui est important. À ce moment-là,
had
oui,
bad deeds, he made bad deeds, that he
on
caused
doit
suffering?
l'aider.
We have to
D'ailleurs,
help him.
quand il a été renvoyé, bien sûr,
When he was
l'ordre des maristes
discharged,
aidé
the order of the
à
Marist
avoir un
brothers
appartement,
helped
ils
him
ont
find a place to
donné
live in,
des moyens financiers de
helped him
vivre.
financially.
Ils ne l'ont pas abandonné. Ce que je trouve normal, parce que
which
pendant
I
une grande
find
partie de sa
very
vie,
normal
il a
because
été au
in a
service des maristes. Et
big number of his life, in
il
a
faut
great
dire
part
aussi
of his
qu'il a
life, he
accompli
was with the Maristes.
beaucoup de bonnes choses aussi, sur le plan scolaire et sur le plan
So
des
on
frères
a
âgés.
personal level
Ça, il faut le
and
reconnaître.
collective person
Mais il n'était
level,
pas capable
he wasn't
d'assurer ce qu'il avait
capable
fait. Et
of
ça, je
assuming
crois que
what
c'était
he
la
committed,
chose qui
what he
comptait
did,
le plus.
and this was very
Voilà.
important.
Merci
This
de
is it.
m'avoir écouté.
Thank you for listening to me.
Si
Merci
vous
à
avez
toi.
Thank
vous avez des
you. Thank
questions.
you for
Et
listening
merci
to me. If you
aux
have
traductrices.
And thank you also for the
Oui,
translators.
merci
Thank you.
beaucoup, Nancy,
Thank you,
et
Nancy.
aussi aux
Thank you.
traductrices parce que
Thank
il y
you.
avait quelques problèmes
Because
d'écoute, mais
the sound was
on
not
a pu
great. We tried
traduire
our
tout.
best
Elles ont très bien
because
traduit
the sound
nos
was not
traductrices.
great. So thank
Et
you
alors,
for the interpreters.
après
And
ton intervention,
after your
très
talk, it's
je vais dire, très profonde
after your
et aussi avec
sharing that
beaucoup de
is deep and
sensibilité. Tu as
very
traité de thèmes très, très, très graves, très durs.
very
Et
sensitive. You
nous
talked
allons
about very
nous diviser en groupes
significant
de
and
travail. C'est
serious matters.
c'est
So we're going now to
15h45.
break into groups.
Vous avez
It's
25 minutes
15:45 Roman
jusqu'à
time. You
4h10
have
pour
25 minutes
discuter en groupe
for 10
sur ce
minutes
que
to
vous a
discuss
touché le
in
plus
groups
de deux
what you
interventions
have
de
heard, what touched
Brendan
you the
et de
more
Nancy. Et vous pouvez
in
formuler des
both
questions
the interventions,
que vous allez
Brendan and
poser
Nancy's
à
one.
4h10 quand on se retrouvera tous
At
ensemble
4:10
dans le groupe.
when we are back, you can
Mary
ask
John,
questions if you
est-ce que
have.
tu veux,
So
do
Mary
you
John,
want to add something? It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the questions there, it's there in the chat. It's in English there. You know, what strikes you from this afternoon's presentation, more or less what Father Mario said. And if you have any questions or observations, I'm sure you have much for Nancy and Brother Brandon. So we will get back to the plenum after 25 minutes, no?
Yes, at 10 past 4.
Okay.
And now we can divide in groups. We ask to the team. Okay, thank you so much. Si je...
Several languages
Ok, c'est bien.
simultaneously,
Alors,
no
Mary
problem.
John,
So,
on
Mary
va
John,
commencer. Si
we're
tu es
going to
d'accord,
start.
if
If
you
you
agree, we
agree,
can start this second part with asking to the fourth language group to share something with us. How can we do for this?
I think we use the chat.
With the chat?
Mario.
Okay. Can you explain to the four groups, each group?
Yeah. No, thank you very much for the sharing. Since we cannot listen from all the groups, we would invite language-wise each group to share one remark or comment or something that you like to share with the larger group. You can put that in the chat, or maybe for the next 20 minutes or something we can take to hear from the groups.
Or perhaps they can raise up her hands and we can choose the first who raise from each group. Do you think?
All right.
Okay. So, is anyone, il y a quelqu'un qui veut lever la main et commencer à partager.
Would somebody like to start
On va
sharing?
commencer avec
We can
le
start
groupe
with
francophone. Comme ça,
the French
on
speaking
reste
group.
dans la langue
We can
française.
start with the
Est-ce qu'il y a un
French
groupe
speaking
qui
group.
lève la main?
Okay, who
Voilà,
would like to
Sœur
take the floor?
Josiane,
Sœur
c'est la première.
Josiane.
Merci
Sister
beaucoup.
Josiane.
Tu
Go
peux
ahead. Thank
parler.
you. You can. The floor is yours. You can have a micro. Yes.
Il faut que voilà.
Voilà, c'est bon, c'est bon.
To unmute
Oui.
yourself.
Ça va.
Yes.
Pour notre groupe,
For our
nous avons
group,
dit que nous avons
we
été
said
touchés par
that we were
l'accent
very
mis
touched
sur l'abuseur, quoi faire et
by
comment l'aider. Parce que
the
souvent, nous
ideas,
cherchons
the
comment
actions
protéger
put
la
on the
victime.
abuser,
Et
what to do and
les
not to do,
facteurs
because
qui peuvent
often we think about
influencer
the
nos
victim
décisions
and what to do with the victims. So
ont été
the
une grande
elements that can
clarification pour
have an
nous,
impact
pour se
on
baser
our
sur certains
decisions were very
critères.
important to us. They offered
En
us
plus,
criteria
parfois le
to take
coupable
decisions.
ne se rend pas compte, il se
Sometimes
croit victime. Donc, il est aussi
abuser
vulnérable.
is not aware, the guilty is not
Et
aware.
l'expérience partagée par
He
Nancy
needs
nous a
to
beaucoup éclairé que ce n'est pas
be
facile
aware.
d'accompagner,
And the
comment il faut
experience
aller
shared by
étape
Miss
par étape.
Nancy
Et
showed
les
us how
échanges sont parfois
important it
stressants,
is
mais la
to go
conversation
step by
continuelle
step,
et la
and how the
patience
exchange can be
joue un
stressful
grand
and
rôle pour que
frustrating,
cette personne
but
soit en prise de
continuity and
conscience.
consistency
Sinon,
can
nous ne
really
pouvons
help,
pas l'aider.
especially to bring
Et
probably those people to be aware of their act,
il y a un
because if
point
they
qui nous a
don't
manqué. Ce
become
n'est pas
aware, we
toujours
cannot. It is
on cherche avec qui nous travaillons seulement, parce que parfois dans nos
sometimes
communautés religieuses, nous vivons l'abus
in our
entre frères
communities.
et frères
It's not
ou
only with the
sœurs et
employees
sœurs.
that we have, it's within
Donc,
our religious
c'est,
communities. Sometimes with our brothers and
comment
sisters,
dire,
we suffer from abuse. How
nous
to
demandons
say,
pour la prochaine fois s'il
we
y a
would
d'autres
like for next
rencontres
time,
de
if you're
toucher
going
ce
to
point.
plan another safeguarding event, to talk about this.
Et il y a eu encore
Thank
un
you.
point,
And
parfois dans des situations d'abus,
sometimes in
ça
a
dépend
situation of abuse,
des cultures. Il
it
y a des
also
comportements acceptés dans une culture
culturally
et non
based.
pas acceptés dans
Certain
une autre.
behaviors are accepted in certain cultures and aren't in other cultures.
Voilà,
Okay.
So the
ce
cultural
que j'ai pu
element.
résumer.
This is
Merci
what
beaucoup,
Merci.
Sœur
Thank you,
Josiane.
Josiane.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sister Josiane.
There are three more hands up there, and hopefully from different languages. Jose?
Espagnol?
Español, por
And
favor.
then French.
Spanish.
Okay.
Yo de manera breve,
I
en nuestro
will
grupo
briefly
de lengua
say
española
that in
éramos tres
our Spanish
personas
group there were three
y
of us,
los tres somos
and
personas con
we
experiencia en
are
haber participado en otros
experienced
encuentros y en
in
otras
this sense. We
formaciones.
had many
Y
meetings,
a
many
pesar de ser
formations
personas con
on
una cierta
safeguarding.
experiencia y una
We
cierta
have
formación en este tema,
experience, we have
nos ha vuelto a
formation,
llamar la
but
atención
we
la
feel
insistencia
that
del hermano
we should
Brendan en que el abusador también es una
stress
persona
what
humana,
Brother Brendan said.
que
Abuser
también
are
necesita,
human beings. They
que
are
no
in
podemos
need
concentrarnos
of help.
solamente en quien ha
We
sufrido el
shouldn't
abuso,
focus
que es
only
muy
on the
grave y es
victims. Of
terrible.
course, it is very
También el
important to help the
abusador
victims, but
necesita
also
ayuda y
perpetrators
nos ha
are in
gustado
need of
mucho los
help.
puntos que ha
And
dicho el
we
hermano
liked
Brendan y
very
también nos ha
much
gustado mucho
the
la
points
experiencia vital de la
indicated
señora Nancy.
by Brother
Entonces,
Brendan, and
esa
also the
insistencia en que es una
lived
persona humana para
experience of
nosotros ha
Nancy.
sido lo
It is a
lo
human
más
being,
fuerte
and
hoy.
we shouldn't forget it. We are
Gracias.
referring to human
Muchas
beings.
gracias, José. English, there is some English speaker who can raise the hand.
Sister
Francisco. Sister Francisco, can you
Hermana.
open your hermana?
Able to unmute.
Unmute,
Okay.
please. Yes.
Yes. And one point that came up in our group sharing, we were 5 of us, and almost all of us were grateful to Brendan and the whole congregation for taking that inner freedom to share about the congregation with this whole group. Specific examples have really helped us. That was very touching. And justice and mercy are to be balanced, and charity is to be extended to the person, the abuser. But at the same time, how do we take care of the community, which is allowing this person, how this community is to be given the awareness and help to accept this person. So these are the points that, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Nirmala.
Italiano, Daniela.
Grazie. Nel nostro gruppo eravamo in tre e ringraziamo per gli interventi perché sono stati veramente molto illuminanti. Un aspetto che un po' risuonava è questo: se fossimo noi nella condizione di dover accompagnare qualcuno che ha abusato, sarebbe molto difficile. Personalmente, cioè mettersi in empatia o comunque dalla parte dell'abusatore, mentre è semplice, più semplice accompagnare la vittima, accompagnare chi ha abusato può essere difficile. Riteniamo che sia importantissimo quello che è stato spiegato del cammino di accompagnamento, anche se, come è stato espresso nella testimonianza, spesso chi abusa non riconosce l'abuso e quindi questa diventa la barriera un po' più grande in un cammino di accompagnamento. E una cosa che ci chiedevamo, abbiamo sentito tutti esempi avvenuti in comunità maschili, quanto questo fenomeno sia presente nelle comunità femminili, o forse più, anche se non ci sono magari molti abusi sessuali, possono esserci abusi psicologici, fisici, che non sono da meno. Quindi come anche gestire questo. E un'ultima domanda che ci era sorta era: come accompagnare la persona dal momento in cui viene accusata fino a quando si verifica la colpevolezza, perché non tutti gli accusati sono colpevoli. Quindi qual è il cammino migliore da fare, tutelando la persona e non arrivando subito al giudizio? Grazie per i contenuti.
Grazie, Daniela. Dunque, adesso possiamo leggere qualche cosa che è stata scritta sulla chat. Mary John, would you like to read some question?
I don't know, there are a few more hands up. I don't know, maybe we could take one or two comments more before.
Yes, please.
Yeah, there is Frank, yes, and then Mary, 2-3 more, and then we go to the questions.
Ok.
François Xavier, à vous la parole. Oui, vous pouvez.
Oui, dans notre groupe, nous avons partagé des interrogations par rapport aux raisons de renvoyer. Un des membres de notre groupe pensait que c'était automatique. Et nous avons apprécié la liste des valeurs à prendre en compte qui a été exposée par le père Brendan. Nous avons parlé aussi des applications pour la formation du récit bien détaillé de Nancy. Et puis, une interrogation, est-ce que Gerhard était récidiviste au sens où il y a eu des nouvelles plaintes après sa première interpellation, ou est-ce que toutes ces plaintes remontaient à la période avant la première interpellation?
Merci. Espagnol, Comunidad de Résistance, peut-être. Ok, de Resistencia.
Hermana Hilda.
Hermana Hilda. Ah.
Non si sente.
No me estoy viendo. No me estoy
There are others.
No se escucha, hermana.
Ok. Monica.
Sì, buonasera. Ecco, il nostro gruppo era costituito da me, che sono una laica delegata della provincia dei frati minori conventuali padovana, e altre 3 suore. Quello che ci ha colpito molto è stato il concetto di supervisione permanente, perché ci si rende conto effettivamente che gli abusatori, se non vengono accolti, curati e trattati, si espongono a recidive molto elevate. Ecco. E da lì ci siamo chiesti chi deve svolgere l'attività di supervisione permanente. Un altro punto molto importante che poi io come delegata mi sono trovata a vivere è proprio anche toccare con mano che certamente alcuni religiosi sono stati colpiti da interventi quali l'ammonizione canonica rispetto degli atti che hanno perpetrato. Però effettivamente lì si tratta di una pena che ha un inizio e una fine, mentre invece per il ricevente delle molestie o degli abusi, soprattutto quelli spirituali, cioè te lo faccio in nome di Dio, perché la Chiesa è cambiata per cui la Chiesa dice che si può fare anche questo. Si può fare la penetrazione sessuale, si può fare, come dire, eccetera, eccetera, insomma, atti impropri. Io ho visto dei religiosi che sono stati esposti a ammonizioni canoniche e la durata della sanzione, diciamo, della pena ha avuto un inizio e la fine. Mi chiedo come quantificare invece il danno di chi ha ricevuto soprattutto un abuso spirituale, più che quello fisico. Grazie.
Spiritual abuse, even more than the physical one. Has been a victim of a spiritual
we
abuse.
need someone in English and Spanish.
Okay.
Iliac.
I can speak in Spanish. ¿Puedo hablar español?
Okay.
No, nuestro grupo comentaba
in our group,
que
we said
nuestro grupo comentaba que en algunos lugares no, en
that
algunos
in
países
some
no
areas,
hay
in some countries,
lugares especiales para
we do not have
que
specific
puedan recibir ahí
facilities
personas que han sido,
to help
digamos,
those who
procesadas y que siguen
perpetrated
como miembros del instituto o los
crimes
institutos
or
y que
abuses,
necesitan atención psicológica
those who are still
y
members of
supervisión.
institutes and who are in
Entonces,
need
esto
of
es algo
psychological
que
help
las
or
posibilidades
supervision.
económicas también
This
son
is a
muy
point that we should address, we believe.
un elemento importante
It is
que impide a
important.
veces
Sometimes
encontrar una solución
this
pues
makes
adecuada,
very
pero que se deben
complicated for us to
explorar y que se
find a
tienen que empezar, que
solution,
se tienen que
and we
buscar.
should
Y
find
a mí lo que me
new
impresionó
ways to
particularmente
support
es,
these people.
digamos, yo
For me, it
agradezco
was
todo,
very
pero
striking.
en particular
In
los
particular,
elementos que el hermano
those
presentó
elements
que ayudan a tomar
presented
decisiones, ¿no?
by Brother
Porque yo
Brendan to
he tenido
take
que tomar
decisions.
decisiones
For me,
por mi responsabilidad, digamos, y me
as for my
ayudó a
role,
tener,
I had to
digamos,
take
esa
decisions, and
claridad y considerar hacer una
those
lista un poco
points,
más
I think that
completa
can help
de
us
los
very
aspectos
much
que hay que
in
tomar
the
en cuenta.
decision-taking
Y me pareció muy
process.
útil.
I thought that it was
Gracias.
very helpful. Thank you.
Gracias. English. Sister Inviolata?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. From the English group, I think most of our questions are on the chat, but I want to appreciate our speakers for the session. A few of the things that we talked about in the English group of interest was, of course, Brother Brendan, we've talked about the people who have been accused, but because they were found guilty. What we were wondering is then what is the process of when the person has been falsely accused? And, how do you handle that case? Because it is not proven, but it has been a public issue. And then also there's the question of, again, all the cases we've had, it's about a religious who is abusing external members. what about if the offender and the victim both belong to the same community? How do you handle that when they are both members of the same religious community, most probably living under the same roof? And so we had questions like that. And then at what point does the law enforcement come in? Because the first instinct of the superior is to protect the member. That one is what we have seen. So at what point does the external agencies come in for justice and fairness? Thank you.
Thank you, sister. Yes, please.
No, I think that takes us to the questions. There is just one, Sister Marie-Louise. Maybe, Sister, if you can be quite brief, and then we can go to the Sister Marie. Okay. And then we can go to the questions. Some questions are there already in the chat, which Sister Inviolata already asked. Very good. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. J'ai déjà posé mes questions sur le chat et l'une vient d'être posée. Que faire vraiment des victimes ou des abuseurs injustement condamnés, quoi. Voilà, c'était l'une des questions. L'autre question, c'est se rapprocher davantage des communautés féminines pour y faire la lumière. On sait que la sœur Lembo en a parlé, mais les accompagner davantage pour y faire la lumière. Et comment vraiment inculturer cette approche de prise de décision quand un membre de la communauté est victime et comment est accusé d'avoir abusé. Voilà, comment inculturer cela, donc prendre en question la question culturelle, physiologique, psychologique et tout du membre concerné. Merci bien.
Merci, Sœur Marie-Louise. Si vous êtes d'accord, je vais demander à Brendan et Nancy de commencer une brève réponse à ces deux, trois questions qui sont comment traiter ceux qui sont injustement accusés et comment ça se passe dans les congrégations féminines. Et voilà, si vous voulez commencer avec ça, après on va lire d'autres questions.
And then maybe later on we can read some questions in the chat. Please mute your microphones if you're not taking the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the reflections and for the questions, which are interesting and helpful. The issue of false allegations is one which has occupied some of my thinking, because I have had to deal with false allegations in different countries and also in 2 continents. The first false allegation I dealt with was in Africa, not in Europe. It's very difficult, and in the first instance, remember the first slide I said was the paramountcy principle, and if the needs of the victim are paramount, it means you have to remove the person from ministry. And it's better if you explain why. Part of our experience in Germany is when the brother was removed, the reason wasn't given, and that caused us problems. Then you have to do an investigation. If you come to the conclusion that it's false or there's no evidence that supports it, the person has the right to be returned to ministry, and there should be a statement saying an investigation has been undertaken and it has not been upheld. The person has a right to their good name. It gets difficult when you have one person making an allegation and nobody else was there. And I'm frankly not sure what you do there. Those are the difficult cases. But where there is, it is not easy to substantiate. For example, we had a case where the police investigated and concluded that the person wasn't at the school when the brother was there. It couldn't have been. Another victim in Scotland made an allegation when he wasn't at the school and the brother was there. Another allegation, I say this with great sadness, the brother wasn't physically able to do what he was accused of, and he had to talk about these things. So there are lots and lots of different circumstances, but the key issue is an investigation, independent people, not members of the order, who can give you a good conclusion, and then make sure if you cannot substantiate it, you return the person so that they can have their good name. Nancy, do you want to add anything? Nancy, vous pouvez me comprendre?
Peut-être Nancy, elle pourrait répondre sur la question de congrégation féminine ou pour changer le sujet.
Yeah.
Nancy,
Okay.
Maybe you want to say something on women religious?
tu nous entends?
Oui, j'entends.
Tu voudrais ajouter quelque chose à ce qu'a dit Brendan ou tu veux nous dire quelque chose sur les communautés féminines?
Or would you like to say something
sur les communautés féminines, j'ai pas vraiment beaucoup d'expérience. Je sais seulement que ça arrive aussi assez souvent, qu'il y a celle qui a abusé et celle qui a été abusée dans la même communauté, et que souvent les communautés féminines ont des problèmes pour avoir une sorte de médiateur venant de l'extérieur. Parce que je trouve que c'est important, bien souvent, que ce soit celle qui a abusé ou celle qui est abusée, qu'elle puisse avoir un interlocuteur, en quelque sorte, qui n'appartienne pas à cet ordre. Et elles disent souvent que c'est très difficile d'avoir des personnes de contact. Je fais partie d'autres groupes. Et il y a beaucoup d'ordres religieux qui cherchent des personnes de contact pour pouvoir régler certains problèmes. Mais dans les ordres féminins, les problèmes sont les mêmes.
And external mediators, and with women religious,
c'est surtout en fait
also the same problem. I would say not exactly the same. But it's when the abused and the abused,
dans
so
la
the
même communauté
abuser
peut-être
and
ou
the
dans la même...
abused
c'est moins souvent, par exemple, moins souvent avec des élèves. Ça sera avec des élèves dans les communautés religieuses. Ce seront souvent plus souvent des pressions psychologiques.
Religious men. When it's with women, it's more members of the same community, and often it's psychological. It's psychological abuse.
Très différent.
It's very different. It's very different. It's very different. Brendan?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Let me just add something.
Volevo aggiungere qualcosa.
Hold on, I need to put off the translation here.
Allora,
one of the differences between
una delle differenze
men and women
tra
is
gli
that
uomini e le donne
90%
è che
of
il
abuse
90% degli abusi
by men
è da parte
and
degli uomini
only 10%
e
at
solo
most by women.
10%
What they've
sono
also
per le
found
donne. Però
is that
inoltre
abuse by women
l'abuso delle
be less
donne
intrusive than by men.
tende a essere meno intrusiva di quello degli uomini.
And I'm trying to turn off the translation because it's interfering with me speaking. Okay, that's fine. For example, there are cases in schools
ci sono
of
casi nelle
female
scuole
teachers becoming
delle
involved with adolescent male students,
che
but
sono
because it's
coinvolte
male,
con
they often don't consider
adolescenti,
it abuse because a young boy might want to think he's being flattered by the attention of the female teacher.
L'insegnante
So,
c'è un
the other thing is,
adolescente, l'insegnante
people often
donna,
ask about
però spesso
victims of abuse who become
le vittime
abusers.
degli abusi
I
che
only know of
diventano,
one
che abusano a
case
loro
in the
volta.
research I've
E
looked
ho
at
trovato
where a
solo una
female
persona
victim became an abuser.
della
Whereas there are
ricerca che è
many
una
cases of
donna
male victims who
vittima che è
become abusers.
diventata
Not all,
abusato
most
lei,
no more than 1/3.
invece
But
negli
there
uomini
are
è più
differences in
frequente, qui non
gender
ci sono
issues with sex and sexuality
differenze
in men and
di
women. That's
genere,
the important
no?
thing to bear
E
in mind.
questo è
So I'm
l'aspetto
not sure it's
importante, però
about
non sono sicuro
women
che,
religious having their psychological and emotional needs met.
magari
I think it's a difference
si
of
trova una
gender issues.
differenza di genere.
Regarding in the same
Allora, per quanto
community,
riguarda di
I dealt
qualcosa
with
nella
one
stessa
case
comunità,
where
ho
there
avuto a
was
che
a
fare con
brother
un
who
caso, un
40 years
fratello
previously
che
had experienced
precedentemente ha
abuse
avuto
by an older
un'esperienza
brother in his house.
abuso di un fratello
The
più
older brother
grande,
wanted to
quello più
talk to the younger
grande
one
voleva parlare
to
a quello
shake his
giovane
hands
per
and
prenderli per
to feel
mano
forgiven, basically.
e
The
essere
younger one, and they were both over
perdonato,
60,
e
didn't want that. He said, I can live
erano
with
più
him, I can
anziani.
talk to
Ha
him, I
detto,
don't
io
want him to
posso
talk to me.
continuare a vivere con lui, ma non voglio che mi
Building on
parli.
what Nancy
Allora,
said,
e
in that country, there
in
was a
quel
government
paese c'era
organization for
un'organizzazione
mediation.
del
So
governo
I
per la
asked their help,
mediazione, quindi ho chiesto il
and
loro
somebody
aiuto
met the two
e
individual
qualcuno ha
brothers,
incontrato i due fratelli
was able to
e
communicate,
è stato in grado
but the
di
younger one
comunicare
said,
con quello
I'm
più
able to
giovane. Ha
live,
detto,
I
io
don't
posso
want him to
vivere,
try to reach out to
ma
me to
non
talk.
voglio che mi parli.
And I was
E
told that, and when I
è stato
spoke to the
detto,
older
quando io
man,
ho
he
parlato di quello
repeated
più
his desire to
anziano,
talk.
ha
I said,
detto
look,
invece
the
che,
answer
sai,
is no.
la
This brother
risposta è
has said he
no.
can live with you. He does
Questo
not want you
fratello ha
to reach out
detto
to him. He
che
doesn't want to talk
non
about it.
vuole
You need to
parlarti con
respect
te
his
e devi
preference.
rispettare quello che lui
If it's
sta
a younger
chiedendo.
age group and as a
Un
younger man
gruppo
who's been
come
abused by an
un
older
più
one,
giovane che è stato
again, go
abusato
back
da
to my
uno più
first slide. The paramount's the
anziano,
principle.
no?
What's
Il
paramount are the
principio
needs and desires of the
fondamentale
victim.
sulle
If the victim
delle
wants to
vittime.
move,
Se
he should be
la
allowed to
vittima
move. If he says,
vuole
I
dire, per
cannot live
esempio,
with this
non
person who's abused
posso
me,
vivere con
I
questa
would believe
persona
that
che mi
has to
ha
be
abusato,
respected.
questo
You
deve essere
cannot force a
rispettato.
victim
Non si può
survivor
forzare
to
a
live in the
una
same house
vittima di
as
vivere
somebody who
nella
has
stessa
abused him or
casa
her.
con una
But
casa,
as again,
con
going
una
back to
persona
what
che l'ha
Nancy says,
abusato,
a
però
mediator who'll
un
speak to them
mediatore,
both
come ha detto
independently,
Nancy, che li può parlare a livello
only bring them
indipendente
together if
e
both parties are in agreement.
e
Do not
metterli
force the
insieme
victim to be in the
solo
room
se
with the
sono d'accordo.
perpetrator
No,
if
non
he or she
devono
is not able to
metterli
do that.
insieme, farli
And the
incontrare
needs
solo se
and
sono
preferences of the
d'accordo,
victim
e
must
le
have the priority.
necessità delle vittime devono avere la priorità.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Grazie.
Mary John.
There are some
Ci
questions in
sono
the
alcune
chat, no?
domande
Some
nella
in
chat,
French, some in
in
Spanish.
francese, alcune
You want to choose one and
vuole
Nancy and I
sceglierne.
can respond?
Nancy.
Allora,
There is one in Spanish.
Ce n'è una in spagnolo.
Gracias a Lucy Camilleri y al hermano Brendan por sus presentaciones. Me impresionó la paciencia de Lucy para acompañar el proceso del hermano, aceptando su negativa a denunciar el daño infligido, presentándole el daño de las víctimas. Encuentro mucha dificultad para ayudar a las personas cuando no renuncian sus actitudes abusivas. Todo un tema para trabajar la corrección fraterna. C'est le problème d'aider quelqu'un qui ne reconnaît pas ses fautes. Voilà. Qui veut parler?
Who would like to
Let me begin, then
intervene?
Nancy can respond, because we were both involved in that case. The thing which I found very difficult was the minimization of the offence or the offences. Somebody asked about the other offences. When this brother was removed from ministry, we knew of 2 offences, and he accidentally confessed to a third, inadvertently. By the time we decided to remove him, we knew of 20 offences. So continually there were more and more offences. And one time when I was talking to him, he said to me, when I compare the good things that I have done, and he did very many good things, and then he added, and I compare it to these small things I have done. Now, I reacted and I said, yes, you did many good things, but do not ever tell me that what you did were small things. I regret that. I wish I had asked him to explain what he meant, but the minimization I frankly found offensive. And I don't know if I ever got over that. I think Nancy had more success with the case where he regretted the damage he did, but as far as I know, he didn't extend that to the other people. Dealing with that kind of minimization is difficult. It's one of the reasons why, as somebody who worked with sex offenders, group therapy is much more effective than individual therapy. Because in group therapy, the other group members can challenge somebody who says that kind of thing and who minimizes. Whereas the individual therapist who has to try to build up an empathic relationship to do effective therapy, you're not in a position to do that in the same way. There are ways of doing it, but that's not the easiest thing. So I regretted not being able to find good group therapy where he could be challenged about some of his attitudes, because that's the place where that could happen. Nancy, do you want to add anything?
Thank you, Brendan.
Pas vraiment, je suis complètement d'accord avec ce que tu as dit. On est tous désolés de ne pas avoir réussi à ce que...
I agree with Brendan. We're all very sorry that sometimes we do not succeed, and we do not, especially in front of people who do not admit the bad deeds they've done. And I also agree that therapeutic group therapy is much more efficient than a personal one, but the problem remains how to, between brackets, force somebody to go to therapy. That is the problem.
Thank you. There is another question in the chat. I think Brendan and Nancy have addressed that. What happens when an offender is dismissed from the congregation and the family also rejects him? In such a scenario, how one is able to move forward? Is it fair?
The question of is it fair? the person has damaged other human beings, and there are consequences. One of the things, I remember a story about a brother in my order who didn't abuse anyone, but he continually did not live our life. And when the provincial saw the psychiatrist said, "Can I become a Maris brother?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you don't have to get up for prayers, you don't have to go to meals, you don't have to behave, you can spend the money, you can crash the car." I said, "It's great, there's no consequences." So I think that in religious life, there are very few consequences. And I think that with child abuse or adult abuse, there have to be consequences. So I think fairness is an interesting concept to think about there. If somebody leaves and the family rejects or abandons, I think the important thing is that we don't reject or abandon. The fact that they can no longer be members doesn't mean that they lose, in a sense, a call on our brotherhood or sisterhood. As I saw with our brothers in Australia, they can still benefit from support. They can still have contact if they choose. But what we say is, as a consequence of your behavior, you can no longer be a member of our group.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. I think there is another interesting question also. Does our form of life, our institutions, somehow, to some extent, cause abuse?
That's a wonderful and fascinating question. And it's one of the reasons I did the study I did, was to try to understand better how the Marist system, organization and culture contributed to abuse. So I'm going to take issue with the word cause because that's too strong. I think I would be very reluctant to say something caused abuse. I think there's a whole range of factors that contribute. And a number of things emerged from that. Among them were the practice of obedience in the past, and sadly still in some orders, where individuals lost a sense of personal agency and they did things out of obedience, and some of the things they did were not healthy for them. Perfectionistic spiritualities were very damaging, especially when there was also a theology of sexuality and chastity, that any small thing was a serious matter. So they were actually scared of their own sexual desires and they had no place to speak about it. So that perfectionism, that judgment, that sense of always failing and always coming up short, added to a culture that couldn't talk about sex, so it was kept inside, being always vigilant about their own sexual desires and feeling guilty for having sexual desires, those all contributed. For the men who were homosexual, which was some of them but not all of them, the church's theology of homosexuality was not helpful. So, for example, in the 1970s and early 80s, the church documents talked about homosexual orientation as a pathology, as a mental illness. And as one author said, these people are not suffering from pathology, they're suffering from inhumanity because of how they were treated. Another issue was the whole theology of masturbation, which was it was impossible to talk about. Even me saying it in this webinar probably shocked some people. The whole ability to talk in an adult way about sexuality was problematic. So that whilst masturbation was part of many of these men's lives, they felt profoundly guilty and ashamed and had nowhere to talk about it. So the whole church culture and societal culture around homosexuality, masturbation, talking about sexuality, lack of education in chastity with high impossible expectations that human beings cannot achieve, with an unhealthy theology of sexuality, all contributed, be careful, did not cause, but contributed to the culture within which these men made these tragic decisions. I can't hear you, Mary Jo.
Mary Jo, open your...
Okay. No, I said thank you very much for that. It was a very good explanation for that. I don't know if Nancy wants to add something more to that, or there is another Nancy? No.
Yeah, no.
Mute.
Joy? Yes. I would like to say thank you for having given me the opportunity to talk to you, and I hope that this will contribute to evolve the way a society reacts towards victims and towards abusers, because both parties need empathy. I'm not saying sympathy, I'm saying empathy, compassion.
Grazie. Thank you. I think there is another question of a general nature in Italian, which asks, che ruolo può avere la comunità nella prevenzione, contenzione delle tendenze abusanti?
Abusing tendency. What is the role of the community? What is the role of the community? What is the role of the community
in the prevention?
In the prevention and in the abusing tendency. What's the role? What's the role? What's the role that a community have in prevention? Abuse. What's the role of the community to prevent and contain the abusing tendencies?
That's not a simple question. I think if people live a healthy life in community, that hopefully will help, because one of the factors that contributed to abuse was people who experienced conflict and stress, or who weren't able to establish healthy adult relationships in community. But I'd be very reluctant to put expectations on a community to prevent abuse, because I think that we have to be careful of what's reasonable. What we've found is that when abuse happens, it's also often when men had opportunities, sisters too, because there has been abuse by women as well. Probably you don't know, there are women in Scotland who were sisters who were in prison just now because of physical abuse of children 40, 50 years ago. So it has happened, and sexual abuse too. But I think that we need to make sure there is what's called guardianship, proper supervision of anybody who's involved with children. So in a sense, the community can ensure that. And if you notice that there's a member who's giving unusual amounts of time to one or two young people and wants to be on their own with them, that is something that should make you alarmed. Or if they want to be in private with them, we know that our traditions said this is not a good thing to do. And I think in the past, we possibly just didn't want to intervene. Nowadays, we should intervene, and there should be more accountability of that kind of behaviour. What can certainly help is training. What they've found is that where there is safeguarding training, there are less incidences of abuse, because people cannot say, I didn't know. So training, accountability, guardianship, supervision, healthy living.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah. There is another question. What are the implications for formation programs for priests and religious? What are the implications?
Well, as you know, we gave a webinar on that topic last year, so I don't want to go over all that. But the key thing for me is we have to do formation about safeguarding as part of formation. So ignoring it and hoping it'll all be fine doesn't work. So I think that there has to be proper safeguarding training as part of formation. And Nancy does that with young people going abroad, so she might be able to say something about that. The other thing is, there is often, sorry, not often, there has been abuse in formation from adult men to young men and sisters to young sisters. So I think we need to actually have the courage to name to people who wish to join us that this can happen, and to say, if this happens, this is what you need to do. If it's your formator who has abused you, and I can give examples of that, then you need to contact the provincial. This is how you do that. One thought I had is that we have a very good tradition in religious life of visitation. I wonder if we should actually intentionally arrange visitation of religious houses with a lay woman as well as a member of the order to visit the young people, so they have someone they can talk to in confidence. Just to have somebody outside the system who has a different perspective, a different eye, whom a young person might have confidence talking to if there's abuse. Most places there's not abuse, but if there is, to create that safety. Also, just to expand the sense of visitation and accountability beyond the internal systems of the order, I think would be healthy.
Thank you very much. I think there are many more questions, much more to reflect and to share, but we are almost reaching our time, 5 minutes more only. I think it was a very, very enlightening afternoon, Brendan and Nancy, for your sharing. It was really, and we talked about an area that we thought or we reflected less on that, we hear less about that from the part of the abuser, and I think it was a very engaging afternoon, and also for throwing light on our questions, in a very nice way. Responding to those questions really made everything so much more clear, much more clarity on this topic now from this perspective. Thank you so much. And Mario, would you like to?
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Brandon, for really opening up a new path to reflect on how in our communities we try to prevent, and most importantly, why do we arrive later on? Why do we have to deal with things later on? And people would live with us for many years and undergo formation. You dealt with this topic and this problem with a lot of balance, considering the abuser and the abused. It requires a lot of patience, a lot of humanity, a lot of love. Thank you. We're going to say thank you to the numerous people who participated from all around the world. But before you leave, we kindly invite you to complete the evaluation template that we're sharing. You can scan the QR code on the screen for the assessment. Please open the QR code with your phones, and you can fill in the evaluation form. Thank you for completing this before you leave.
I just also want to say that Brother Brandon is willing and very generous to share his slides with you. But of course, with the to use discreetly, not for your personal use, or only for the personal and internal use, and not for public use. Brother, you want to say something more about that?
No, just simply, I'm happy to share the images I pick up from the internet and just put them there because they're useful. The information is my own from various sources. I'm happy for people to use it, but what I ask is to be careful. We have had sad stories of people who've taken presentations and just used them. I think that's not respectful. So if you want to use something other than personal use, contact me and ask so that I know how people want to use it. But I'm happy to share the information. Some people mentioned about the list of factors and the ways to respond. Yes, I'm happy to share those. I hope they're useful to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Maria, you want to close it?
We're going to give them a couple of minutes to fill in the form, by scanning the QR code. So after this, we can just bid goodbye, everybody goodbye. Do we have the date for the following webinar?
Yeah. The next webinar is on Monday, the 8th of June. Monday, 8th of June, same time, 2 p.m. Rome time.
Okay, the title is not yet decided, I think.
Yes, it is, I think, the Sacrament of Reconciliation, Safeguarding and the Sacrament of Reconciliation.
Thank you, Mary John. So
yes, that's a very interesting topic.
Yes, you are all invited to come because it's a very sensitive theme, how to pardon each other between the victim and the perpetrators and the community also. This is very important theme. So I think that we can say hello to everybody. You can continue to fulfill the form and